Acne. Acne is treated like it appears out of nowhere, but the actual mechanism is well understood and rarely starts at the surface. Your pores produce sebum, an oily mixture that keeps the skin barrier intact. When sebum production goes into overdrive and combines with dead skin cells, the pores get clogged. Bacteria called Cutibacterium acnes feed on the trapped oil, and your immune system arrives with inflammation. The thing pushing sebum production up the most is hormonal signaling, and that signaling is downstream of diet. Dairy raises insulin-like growth factor 1, often shortened to IGF-1, which directly stimulates the oil glands. High glycemic foods like sugary drinks, sweets, and refined flour spike insulin, which has the same effect. Industrial seed oils contribute to chronic, low-grade inflammation that makes acne worse and slower to heal. Topical creams can manage symptoms but cannot fix a hormonal driver coming from the diet. Reducing dairy for several weeks is one of the highest yield experiments. Cooking with olive oil, butter, ghee, or avocado oil rather than seed oils lowers the inflammatory load. Foods rich in zinc, vitamin A, and omega-3 fatty acids, including eggs, fatty fish, leafy greens, and nuts, support the regulation of oil production. Bloating. Most chronic bloating is the predictable result of habits that interfere with normal digestion, and the most common one is simply eating too fast. When food is inhaled in a few minutes, large volumes of air are swallowed alongside it, and the gut is left to deal with poorly chewed material it was not designed to process in chunks. Carbonated drinks add even more gas to the same compartment. Highly processed food contributes another layer, because it tends to be low in fiber, and often contains sugar alcohols like sorbitol, xylitol, and erythritol. These compounds reach the colon largely intact and become food for bacteria that produce gas as a fermentation byproduct. Drinking water rather than soda with meals removes the gas problem. Reducing ultra-processed food and artificial sweeteners removes the fermentable load. Increasing fiber gradually from cooked vegetables, oats, lentils, beans, and berries gives the gut bacteria something useful to work with. Fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi introduce bacterial strains that help displace the problematic ones. Ginger and peppermint tea after meals reduce post-meal discomfort by relaxing the smooth muscle of the digestive tract. Bad breath. The vast majority of bad breath does not originate in the stomach. It originates in the mouth, specifically from volatile sulfur compounds produced by bacteria living between teeth, beneath the gum line, and on the back of the tongue. Brushing addresses the visible front surfaces of the teeth and very little else, which is why people who brush diligently but do not floss or scrape the tongue continue to have a smell they cannot explain. The other major contributor is dry mouth. Saliva contains enzymes, antimicrobial proteins, and buffers that continuously suppress bacterial growth. When saliva production drops during sleep, with caffeine, with mouth breathing, or with chronic dehydration, the bacterial population expands rapidly. High sugar and high refined carbohydrate intake gives the smell-producing bacteria preferred fuel. Daily flossing removes the food and bacterial film that brushing cannot reach. A tongue scraper used in the morning removes more bacterial mass from the back of the tongue in 15 seconds than brushing can. Chewing fresh parsley, mint, or raw apple offers temporary relief through both mechanical cleaning and natural antibacterial compounds. Green tea contains polyphenols that suppress the bacteria responsible for the smell. Constipation. Going to the bathroom every 2 or 3 days is widely treated as normal because it is common, but common and normal are not the same. Healthy bowel function is a daily event. Fiber intake in modern diets sits well below what the gut needs. Insoluble fiber, found in whole grains, vegetable skins, nuts, and leafy greens, adds the physical bulk that triggers the stretch receptors in the colon. Soluble fiber, found in oats, apples, beans, lentils, and chia seeds, holds water and turns into a gel that allows stool to pass smoothly. Both are required, and most people are short on both. Water intake compounds the problem because fiber without adequate hydration becomes harder rather than softer. A sedentary lifestyle reduces the gastrocolic reflex, which is the natural prompting of the colon, by physical movement after meals. Stress directly slows gut motility through the autonomic nervous system. A tablespoon of ground flaxseed or chia seeds added to breakfast adds a substantial fiber dose. Prunes are clinically validated as more effective than psyllium for many people. A short walk after dinner triggers the gastrocolic reflex. Magnesium citrate draws water into the intestines and softens stool. Acid reflux. Acid reflux happens when the lower esophageal sphincter, a ring of muscle at the junction of the esophagus and the stomach, fails to stay closed when it should be. When that valve relaxes inappropriately, acid moves into the esophagus and irritates a tissue that is not built to handle the pH of stomach acid. Caffeine, alcohol, chocolate, peppermint, and high-fat meals all reduce the tone of the sphincter. Smoking has the same effect and also reduces saliva production. Lying down too soon after eating removes the gravitational protection that keeps the contents in place. Excess abdominal fat raises intra-abdominal pressure, which physically pushes stomach contents upward against the sphincter. Counterintuitively, low stomach acid can also cause reflux symptoms because adequate acid is needed to trigger the sphincter to close properly. Finishing the last meal of the day at least 2 to 3 hours before lying down. Elevating the head of the bed by a few inches with risers, rather than just adding pillows. Reducing caffeine and alcohol, particularly in the evening. Ginger tea, chamomile tea, and slippery elm have evidence as soothing agents. Apple cider vinegar diluted in water before meals helps a subset of people whose reflux is driven by low rather than high acid. Chewing sugar-free gum after meals stimulates saliva, which both neutralizes and clears residual acid. Quick break. If you actually want to get in the best shape of your life for summer, I built a 6-week program called Summer Shred, designed to do exactly that. And it comes with a free copy of my cookbook, Bland is Banned. So you're eating food you actually enjoy the entire time. None of that bland diet food nonsense. If you just want the cookbook on its own, it's now available at half price. Both links are in the description. Back pain. Lower back pain in the majority of cases is not a structural injury. It is the cumulative output of sitting for long periods in a position the human body was not designed to hold. Prolonged seated posture shortens the hip flexors, weakens the gluteal muscles that should be doing most of the load bearing during standing and lifting, deactivates the deep core stabilizers, and rounds the upper back forward. The lower back ends up doing the work of multiple structures that have effectively gone offline. When the system is finally asked to perform something simple, like lifting a child or a box, the lower back is the only thing trying, and it fails. The injury is not the lift, it is the years of sitting that left the back as the only available structure. Standing and moving regularly through the day, even briefly every 30 to 60 minutes, prevents accumulated stiffness. Stretching the hip flexors with movements like the couch, stretch directly reverses the chronic shortening from sitting. Strengthening the glutes with hip thrusts, glute bridges, and Romanian deadlifts shifts load away from the lumbar spine. Training the deep core with dead bugs, bird dogs, and side planks restores the stability that long sitting eroded. Neck pain. The mechanics of neck pain in modern life are mostly explained by physics. The human head weighs roughly 10 to 12 pounds when stacked correctly above the spine, but the effective load increases with forward tilt because the further the head moves from its center of gravity, the more leverage is created against the muscles holding it up. At 15 degrees of forward tilt, the load approximately doubles. At 45 degrees, the angle people typically use to look at a phone, the cervical spine handles around 50 pounds of effective load. The muscles at the back of the neck and the upper trapezius were not designed to manage that load for hours per day. Over time, the natural cervical curve flattens or reverses, and chronic tightness, headaches, and reduced mobility follow. A stack of pillows that pushes the head forward through the night locks the same forward flexed position into 10 more hours of loading. Holding the phone closer to eye level, raising the monitor on a stand, and choosing a single supportive pillow that keeps the head aligned with the spine all reduce the load. Chin tucks throughout the day re-engage the deep neck flexors. Doorway pec stretches open the chronically shortened front of the shoulders. Magnesium-rich foods like leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, and almonds help the muscles relax through normal physiology. Headaches. The majority of recurring headaches in otherwise healthy people fall into a few well-defined categories with identifiable triggers. Dehydration is the single most common one and the easiest to test. Even mild systemic dehydration reduces cerebrospinal fluid volume, slightly enough to cause traction on pain-sensitive structures around the brain. A large glass of water resolves a true dehydration headache within 20 to 30 minutes. Sleep restriction is the next most common cause, both from total hours and from disrupted sleep architecture. Blood sugar swings are another predictable trigger. Skipping meals, fueling on coffee alone, and eating high-sugar, low-protein meals all create the kind of glucose volatility that the brain registers as pain. Tension headaches, which feel like a band around the head, originate in chronically contracted muscles in the neck, shoulders, and jaw. Magnesium has substantial evidence as a preventative and is widely deficient in modern diets. Ginger has demonstrated efficacy comparable to some medications for acute migraine in trials. Peppermint oil applied to the temples can ease tension headaches reliably. Persistent, unexplained headaches warrant a closer look at jaw clenching at night, which is one of the most under-recognized causes of morning headaches. Always tired. Persistent fatigue despite adequate time in bed is not an inevitable feature of modern life. The most common cause is poor sleep quality rather than insufficient sleep duration. Alcohol close to bedtime suppresses REM sleep even when it produces drowsiness initially. Bright artificial light in the evening delays melatonin release and pushes the circadian clock later. Phone use in bed exposes the eyes to light wavelengths that the brain interprets as morning. High sugar, low protein meals cause blood glucose to crash hours later. Reliance on caffeine throughout the day masks underlying tiredness while preventing the deeper sleep that would resolve it. Caffeine has a half-life of around 6 hours, which means an afternoon coffee is still actively present in the system at bedtime. Common nutrient deficiencies, including iron in women, vitamin D in low sun populations, vitamin B12 in people on plant-based diets, and magnesium across the population, all manifest as fatigue. Getting morning sunlight in the eyes within the first hour after waking sets the circadian clock decisively. Limiting caffeine to before midday for sensitive individuals. Eating protein at every meal to flatten glucose curves. If basics are in order and fatigue persists, blood work covering iron studies, ferritin, vitamin D, B12 and thyroid function identifies most of the medical causes. Rapid weight gain. Rapid weight gain almost always has a traceable cause once the actual day-to-day intake is examined honestly. Liquid calories are the most common hidden contributor. Coffee drinks with syrup and milk, juices, sodas, sports drinks, and alcohol can collectively contribute 800 to 1500 calories a day without registering as food, and they do not produce the satiety signals that solid food does. Portion creep is the second major contributor. Default serving sizes drift upward over years, particularly for calorie-dense foods like pasta, rice, oils, nuts, and cheese. Eating out more frequently is the third factor, because restaurant cooking uses more fat, more salt, and more sugar than home cooking by orders of magnitude. Stress and sleep loss make all of the above worse by raising ghrelin, lowering leptin, and increasing cravings for high-calorie food. Cortisol elevation from chronic stress directly promotes fat storage in the abdominal region. Tracking food and drink for 3 to 7 days reveals patterns that estimation does not. Removing liquid calories first is usually the highest yield change. Cooking at home most of the time naturally reduces fat, sugar, and salt loading. Prioritizing whole foods, particularly protein, at every meal reduces hunger and the volume needed to feel full. Daily walking of around 8,000 steps adds a substantial caloric expenditure without requiring formal exercise. Getting sick all the time. A pattern of frequent infections in an adult is rarely about exposure and usually about the immune system not being well supported. Sleep is the largest single factor with the strongest evidence. People sleeping fewer than 6 hours per night have been shown in controlled studies to be roughly 4 times more likely to develop a cold after exposure than people sleeping 7 or more. Vitamin D supports antimicrobial peptide production and is widely deficient in populations spending most of the day indoors. Chronic stress raises cortisol, which suppresses the immune response over time. Around 70% of immune cells reside in or around the gut, which means gut health and immune health are tightly linked. A microbiome damaged by repeated antibiotics, low fiber eating, and chronic stress contributes to both reduced immune function and increased inflammation. Sleeping 7 to 8 hours consistently, daily sunlight exposure on the skin during warmer months, and supplementation with vitamin D in winter for those at risk. A diet built around colorful whole foods, including garlic, onions, ginger, citrus fruits, berries, and leafy greens. Fermented foods like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi to support the microbiome. Bone broth at the onset of symptoms for the amino acid and mineral content. Dandruff. Dandruff is most often not a hygiene problem and not a dry skin problem. It is a fungal one. A yeast called Malassezia globosa lives on essentially every adult scalp, where it feeds on the oily secretions called sebum that the scalp naturally produces. In some people, the immune response to a byproduct of that yeast called oleic acid is more sensitive, which produces the itching, redness, and characteristic flaking. The flakes are not dry skin in the classical sense. They are accelerated skin turnover caused by the inflammation. This is why moisturizing the scalp does not resolve dandruff. Antifungal shampoos containing zinc pyrithione, ketoconazole, selenium sulfide, or coal tar reduce the yeast population to a level the scalp tolerates. Used a few times per week and left on the scalp for several minutes before rinsing, they produce reliable improvement. High sugar and high refined carbohydrate diets feed the yeast and worsen the inflammatory response. Omega-3 fatty acids from oily fish, walnuts, and flaxseed reduce systemic inflammation. Tea tree oil mixed with a carrier oil has demonstrated antifungal activity in studies. Coconut oil applied for 30 minutes before washing has both antifungal and barrier supporting properties. Cavities. Cavities are not primarily about how often you brush. They are about how often the teeth are exposed to acid produced by oral bacteria feeding on sugar. Streptococcus mutans is the species most responsible. It metabolizes sugar and refined carbohydrate and produces lactic acid as a byproduct. That acid pulls minerals out of the enamel, weakens it progressively, and eventually creates the structural breakdown known as a cavity. The mineral structure of enamel can rebuild itself between acid exposures through saliva-driven remineralization, which is why frequency matters more than total quantity of sugar. Constant grazing on sweet drinks, sweetened coffees, dried fruit, or fruit juice keeps the mouth in a near continuous acidic state that prevents remineralization. Dry mouth removes the saliva that would otherwise neutralize the acid, which is why mouth breathers and heavy caffeine drinkers have higher cavity rates. Brushing twice daily with a fluoride or hydroxyapatite toothpaste, flossing once daily, limiting sugar and refined carbohydrates to mealtimes rather than spreading them across the day. Sugar-free gum containing xylitol after meals stimulates saliva and actively suppresses Streptococcus mutans. Cheese eaten at the end of a meal raises oral pH and is one of the most overlooked cavity prevention foods. Eye bags. The skin under the eyes is the thinnest skin on the body, which makes it the first place systemic issues become visible. 3 different processes show up there, and they are often confused. Puffiness is fluid retention. Darkness is increased blood vessel visibility through translucent skin. Sodium-heavy diets cause the body to retain water, and the thin under-eye tissue swells noticeably overnight. Dehydration paradoxically does the same thing because the body holds onto fluid more tightly when intake is low. Alcohol disrupts both hydration and sleep architecture, which compounds the appearance. Allergies, including subclinical ones to dust, pollen, or food, drive histamine release that produces puffy lower lids known as allergic shiners. Sleeping on the stomach allows fluid to pool in the face overnight. Poor sleep quality directly worsens the dilation of small blood vessels under the eyes, which makes the darkness more visible through the thin skin. Sleeping 7 to 8 hours on a consistent schedule with the head slightly elevated reduces fluid pooling. Reducing processed food and added salt addresses sodium-driven puffiness. Reducing alcohol resolves multiple contributors at once. Cold compresses, chilled spoons, jade rollers or chilled green tea bags applied for a few minutes constrict the blood vessels and reduce visible puffiness immediately. Thinning hair. Thinning hair often produces immediate concern about going bald, but most cases in adults outside genetic patterns are driven by reversible factors that disrupt the normal hair growth cycle. Each hair follicle cycles through a long growth phase called anagen, a brief transitional phase, and a shedding phase called telogen. Disruption to this cycle causes more hairs than usual to enter the shedding phase at the same time, producing visible thinning that often shows up 2 to 4 months after the trigger. Protein insufficiency is one of the most common causes because hair is composed largely of the structural protein keratin, and the body deprioritizes hair when total protein supply is limited. Iron deficiency, particularly in menstruating women, starves the follicles of oxygen and is consistently linked to diffuse thinning. Thyroid dysfunction, especially hypothyroidism, slows the entire growth cycle. Chronic stress drives a condition called telogen effluvium, where a substantial proportion of follicles synchronize into shedding, often 3 to 4 months after a major stressor. Aggressive caloric restriction or rapid weight loss does the same thing. Eating sufficient protein, ideally a serving at every meal, supports the structural supply hair needs. Zinc from oysters, beef, and pumpkin seeds is required for hair tissue growth. For people losing hair rapidly, blood work covering ferritin, full iron panel, vitamin D, vitamin B12, and the thyroid panel identifies the most common medical causes. Topically, scalp massage with rosemary oil has shown efficacy comparable to minoxidil in a small but well-designed trial. Telomere length. These are the little protective caps on the end of your chromosomes. Every time a cell divides, the telomeres get a tiny bit shorter, and once they get too short, the cell either stops dividing or dies off. That is basically the timer your cells run on. Shorter telomeres are linked to faster aging, worse cardiovascular health, higher cancer risk, and earlier death in some studies. The catch is that telomere length on its own is messy as a longevity marker, because it varies a lot person to person, and trying to artificially lengthen them is not the magic fix some supplement companies pretend it is. What actually moves them in the right direction is the boring stuff. Sleep, not being chronically inflamed, not being constantly stressed, not smoking, not being overweight. For decades, people keep wanting a pill that protects telomeres. Real life keeps answering with the same answer it gives for everything else. Epigenetic age. This is one of the more genuinely useful longevity markers because it does not care how old your birth certificate says you are. It looks at chemical tags called methylation marks sitting on your DNA, and based on the pattern of those marks, it estimates how old your body is actually behaving. So you can be 40 on paper and 47 epigenetically, which is not great. Or you can be 50 on paper and 42 epigenetically, which means whatever you are doing is working. The most well-known ones are tests like the Horvath clock and the more updated Dunedin pace, which measures the pace you are aging at rather than just your current biological age. The reason this marker matters more than most is that it captures the cumulative effect of your lifestyle: sleep, training, food quality, stress, alcohol, sunlight, body fat, inflammation. All of it leaves fingerprints on the methylation pattern. You cannot really fake this one. The body keeps the receipts. Resting heart rate. This one is free, takes 10 seconds, and tells you more than most lab tests people pay hundreds for. A lower resting heart rate generally means a stronger, more efficient heart and a calmer nervous system. People with resting heart rates consistently in the 50s and low 60s tend to live longer than people sitting at 80 plus, even when other factors are controlled for. A high resting heart rate is associated with higher cardiovascular mortality, higher all-cause mortality, and worse metabolic health. It is not just about being a marathon runner. Even modest improvements in cardio fitness drop resting heart rate noticeably over a few months. If your watch is telling you that you sit at 78 most mornings and your friend sits at 58, you are not running the same engine. That gap matters over decades. VO2 max. If there is one fitness number that correlates harder with how long you live than almost anything else, it is this one. VO2 max measures how much oxygen your body can actually use during hard effort. And it basically tells you how good your heart, lungs, and muscles are at working together. Under load. The research on this is honestly ridiculous. People in the bottom 25% of VO2 max for their age have multiple times the risk of dying from any cause, compared to people in the top 25%. Going from low fitness to even average fitness gives you a bigger longevity payoff than almost any drug ever invented. And the best part is, you do not need to be some elite athlete to move this number. Just regular cardio that actually challenges you, mixed with some harder intervals, drags it upward over months. Walking is fine, but it is not enough on its own. Your heart wants to be pushed sometimes. That is the whole point of having one. Grip strength. This one sounds random until you look at the data. Grip strength predicts mortality risk almost as well as blood pressure does. People with weaker grips tend to die sooner, get sicker more often, and lose independence earlier. It is not really about your hands. Grip strength is a stand-in for total body strength, muscle mass, and nervous system function. If your grip is weak in your 50s and 60s, the rest of your body is usually not far behind. Loss of muscle is one of the quietest killers in aging, because nobody notices it happening until they cannot get up off the floor easily, or cannot carry their groceries up the stairs. Lifting weights, even just 2 or 3 days a week, protects this. And no, squeezing one of those little hand grippers does not save you from sarcopenia. You have to actually train. VAT, which is visceral fat. Not all fat is the same. Subcutaneous fat is the soft stuff under your skin that you can pinch. Visceral fat is the dangerous one. It sits deep in the abdomen, wraps around your liver, pancreas, and intestines, and acts almost like its own organ, pumping out inflammatory signals 24 hours a day. High visceral fat is one of the single best predictors of metabolic disease, heart disease, diabetes, and early death. You can be skinny and still have a lot of it, which is why some lean-looking people end up with surprisingly bad blood work. Waist circumference is a decent proxy. If your waist measurement is more than half your height, that is usually a signal that visceral fat is creeping up. A DEXA scan gives you the real number. The good news is that visceral fat is also one of the most responsive things in the body. Lose weight properly, train consistently, sleep well, and it tends to come off fast. And while we are on the subject of actually getting leaner without making your life miserable, this is exactly why both Bland is Banned and Summer Shred exist. Bland is Banned is 102 high-protein, lower-calorie recipes that actually taste like real food. Burgers, wraps, pizzas, fries, desserts, all of that, so you can eat properly without forcing yourself through bland diet food. And Summer Shred is a 6-week personalized program built to get you in the best shape of your life for summer. Structured around what your body actually needs, and it comes with a free copy of Bland is Banned included. Both are half price right now. First link in the description if you want them while the sale is still on. HRV, which is heart rate variability. HRV is one of those markers that sounds like nerd territory, but actually tells you something useful. It is the tiny variation in time between each of your heartbeats, and counterintuitively, more variation is better. High HRV means your nervous system is flexible, your recovery is good, and your body is shifting smoothly between the relaxed state and the alert state when it needs to. Low HRV means your nervous system is stuck in fight or flight mode, which over time wears down everything. Sleep, cardiovascular health, mood, immune function. People with chronically low HRV tend to be more inflamed, sleep worse, recover slower, and have higher long-term disease risk. The frustrating part is HRV is sensitive to literally everything. One bad night of sleep, one stressful work week, 2 drinks too many, and your number tanks. So you do not chase a single day's reading. You look at the trend over weeks. If your average is creeping up over months, your body is in a better place. If it is creeping down, something is draining you. Fasting insulin. People obsess over fasting glucose because it is on every standard blood panel, but fasting insulin is the more revealing number, and barely anyone checks it. Insulin is the hormone your pancreas releases to manage blood sugar, and when you eat too many refined carbs and sugar for years, your cells stop responding to it properly, so your pancreas pumps out more and more insulin to get the same job done. Your glucose can look completely normal on paper, while your insulin is sky high underneath, which is the early stage of insulin resistance that eventually leads to type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, and a long list of other problems. A low fasting insulin generally means your metabolism is responsive and clean. A high fasting insulin means your body has been quietly overworking itself for years to keep glucose in check. This is one of the best early warning signs you can get, and most people only find out about insulin resistance after their glucose has already gone bad, which is decades too late. HbA1c. This is basically a 3-month average of how high your blood sugar has been running. Glucose attaches to red blood cells over time, and since those cells live around 90 to 120 days, the test gives a rolling picture rather than a one-off snapshot. The advantage is you cannot game it by skipping breakfast before your test. It shows the real long-term pattern. Higher HbA1c is associated with higher risk of cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, nerve damage, dementia, and most of the conditions that take years of people's lives quietly. The interesting part is that even within the so-called normal range, lower is generally better, up to a point. People sitting comfortably in the lower normal zone tend to have lower mortality than people drifting at the upper end of normal, even though both technically pass the test. So the goal is not just to avoid diabetes, the goal is to keep this number in the lower half of normal for as long as possible. ApoB. If you actually care about heart disease risk, this is the marker to look at. Standard cholesterol panels give you LDL, HDL, and triglycerides, which are useful but limited. ApoB measures the actual number of cholesterol-carrying particles in your bloodstream that can lodge into artery walls and start the whole process of plaque buildup. Every one of those bad particles has one ApoB molecule on it. So if your ApoB is high, you have a lot of those particles floating around, regardless of what your standard LDL number is doing. Some people have normal-looking LDL but a high ApoB because they have a huge number of smaller particles, which is genuinely dangerous and missed on a basic panel. Lifetime exposure to high ApoB is one of the strongest drivers of cardiovascular disease. Lowering it through diet, training, body composition, and sometimes medication lowers your risk in a dose-dependent way. The earlier you start managing this, the better, because plaque buildup is cumulative across decades, not something that magically starts at 60. LPAA. This one is a weird genetic curveball. LPA is a type of lipoprotein that is mostly determined by genetics, not lifestyle, which means you can be doing everything right and still have a high number because of what your parents gave you. The reason it matters is that high LPA significantly raises the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and aortic valve disease, independent of every other cholesterol marker. You can have perfect LDL, perfect ApoB, low blood pressure, and still be at elevated cardiovascular risk if your LPA is high. Most people have never been tested for it because most doctors do not order it routinely. You only really need to check it once in your life because it does not change much. If yours is high, that does not mean you are doomed. It means everything else becomes more important. Lower your ApoB harder, keep blood pressure tight, keep training control inflammation, and the elevated risk gets partially offset. Blood pressure. Boring marker. Massive impact. Chronically elevated blood pressure damages your blood vessels, kidneys, brain, and heart, slowly but constantly, and it is one of the leading drivers of stroke, heart failure, kidney disease, and cognitive decline. Globally, the reason it gets dismissed is that you usually feel completely fine while it is happening, which is why it is sometimes called the silent killer. Even modestly elevated blood pressure over decades does enormous cumulative damage. The targets keep moving lower as more research comes in. What used to be considered acceptable is now considered pre-hypertension. Lower is generally better, within reason. Cardio fitness, lean body mass, reduced sodium relative to potassium, less alcohol, better sleep, less stress, and weight management all push this number in the right direction. And taking blood pressure once at the doctor's office is not a great reading. Home monitors give you a much truer picture because they catch the actual daily reality rather than the moment your doctor stresses you out. CRP, which is C-reactive protein. This is the easiest marker for systemic inflammation, which is one of the underlying drivers of basically every chronic disease that shortens lifespan. Heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, autoimmune conditions, depression, diabetes complications. All of them involve chronic inflammation in some way. A high CRP means there is something brewing in the background that the immune system has not fully resolved. It could be poor diet, poor sleep, gum disease, gut issues, excess body fat, hidden infections, autoimmune activity, or stress. The number itself is not specific, but it is a useful canary. The most informative version is high sensitivity CRP, or HSCRP, which picks up the lower grade chronic inflammation that the regular CRP test misses. Low HSCRP is associated with lower mortality and lower cardiovascular risk across basically every study. Getting it down comes from the same boring list: body composition, training, sleep, alcohol intake, dental health, and food quality. GGT and ALT. These are liver enzymes, and they tell you whether your liver is being quietly worn down by alcohol, fatty liver, medications, or other chronic stress. Most people only check these once in a blue moon and assume that as long as they are not in the red zone, they are fine. But there is a pattern. Even high normal GGT, still inside the technically acceptable range, is associated with higher mortality, higher cardiovascular risk, and worse metabolic health. ALT behaves similarly. Rising liver enzymes are usually one of the earliest signs that fatty liver is developing, which is now the most common liver condition on Earth and one of the strongest predictors of future type 2 diabetes and heart disease. The good news is that the liver is one of the most regenerative organs in the body. Get your weight down, cut alcohol, fix your diet, and these numbers usually come back into a clean range within months. Eye health markers. This one is underrated. Eye health, specifically things like retinal microvasculature, intraocular pressure, and visual acuity decline, predicts overall vascular health and cognitive aging surprisingly well. The blood vessels in your retina are basically miniature versions of the blood vessels in your brain. So when an eye specialist looks into the back of your eye, they are getting a free preview of what is happening in your nervous system. Early damage to retinal vessels often shows up before measurable brain decline does. People with worsening vision in midlife also have a higher risk of dementia, partly because reduced visual input accelerates cognitive decline, and partly because the same processes that damage the eye damage the brain. A proper eye exam is more useful than people give it credit for, especially after 40. Hearing. Hearing loss is one of the biggest modifiable risk factors for cognitive decline. Full stop. People who lose hearing and never get it corrected end up isolating socially, engaging less, getting fewer inputs into the brain, and accelerating dementia risk significantly. The brain needs sensory input to stay sharp. When you reduce that input, the relevant areas start to atrophy. Hearing aids and proper hearing care in midlife have been linked to lower rates of dementia in some of the more recent large studies. So even though hearing loss feels like a quality of life issue, it is actually a brain longevity issue too. Protecting your hearing earlier by not blasting headphones, wearing protection around loud environments, and getting checked when needed is part of the long game. Walking speed, a weirdly simple but extremely reliable longevity marker, especially after midlife. Slower walking speed is associated with shorter life expectancy, more falls, more disability, and faster cognitive decline. It captures cardiovascular fitness, muscle strength, joint health, balance, nervous system function, and motivation, all in one number. People in their 70s and 80s who walk faster generally outlive those who walk slower by years. And it is not just for old people. Some studies have found that walking speed in midlife also predicts brain aging decades later. It is one of those markers that is hard to fake. Either your body can move quickly and confidently, or it cannot. Sleep quality, specifically deep sleep and REM sleep duration, not just total sleep time. People focus on hours in bed, when the more important question is, how much of that time is actually restorative? Deep sleep is when the body does most of its physical repair, hormonal regulation, and immune work. REM sleep is when the brain consolidates memory and processes emotional information. People with chronically reduced deep sleep have higher inflammation, worse metabolic health, weaker immunity, and faster cognitive decline. People with chronically reduced REM tend to have worse mental health and accelerated brain aging. Poor sleep quality silently drives almost every other longevity marker in the wrong direction. Higher inflammation, worse insulin sensitivity, lower HRV, higher blood pressure, slower recovery, lower mood, lower training quality, fixed sleep, and there is no supplement, diet, or training program that will save you long-term. Lean muscle mass. Most people think of muscle as a vanity metric or a strength metric. It is actually one of the most important longevity organs in the body. Muscle is your largest site of glucose disposal, which means more muscle equals better insulin sensitivity and lower risk of metabolic disease. Muscle protects you from falls and fractures, which are one of the leading causes of death in older adults. Once mobility is lost, muscle releases signaling molecules called myokines that influence brain health, immune function, and inflammation. People with more lean mass relative to body fat in midlife and later life consistently outlive people with less. The boring summary is that lifting weights is not optional if you care about aging well. Cardio without resistance training leaves a huge gap in the longevity equation because cardio does almost nothing to protect lean mass over the decades. The people who age best are almost always doing both. Morning breath. While you sleep, your mouth essentially becomes a biology experiment. During the day, saliva is constantly washing your mouth out and keeping bacterial populations under control. Saliva has antimicrobial properties, and it physically moves food particles and dead cells away before bacteria can fully break them down. But at night, saliva production drops dramatically. Your mouth dries out, and the bacteria living in your mouth, which number in the billions and are always present, have the opportunity to multiply and break down whatever is left in there without interference. The byproduct of that process is sulfur compounds, volatile sulfur compounds to be specific, which smell exactly as bad as they sound. The worse your morning breath, the more active the bacterial breakdown was overnight. People who breathe through their mouths while sleeping tend to have worse morning breath because mouth breathing dries things out even further. Gum disease and old food debris make it worse still. It is genuinely unpleasant, but it is just your mouth doing its decomposition thing in the absence of the usual cleanup crew. Drink water, brush your teeth, and it goes away almost immediately. The bacteria are not a failure of hygiene, they are permanent residents. You just manage them. Mucus and boogers. Your respiratory tract is lined with mucus-producing cells, and they are working constantly. Not just when you are sick. All the time, every day, your body produces roughly 1 liter to 1.5 liters of mucus just as a baseline. It coats the inside of your nose, throat, and airways in a thin sticky layer specifically designed to trap particles before they get into your lungs. Dust, pollen, bacteria, viruses, pollution, all of it gets caught in the mucus and then swept toward the back of your throat by tiny hair-like structures called cilia, where you swallow it without noticing. Boogers are just the dried end result of that process. Mucus at the front of the nose that has had air moving over it, causing it to dry and harden around whatever it caught. It is essentially your body's air filter, doing exactly what it is supposed to do. And the color tells you something. Clear mucus is normal. Yellow or green mucus usually means immune cells are involved, which happens during infection or heavy irritant exposure. The cells release enzymes that oxidize as they die, and that is where the color comes from. It is not actually the bacteria that are green or yellow. It is your immune response. Dandruff. Your skin is constantly renewing itself. Old skin cells die, get pushed to the surface, and shed. This happens everywhere on your body, but it is most visible on your scalp because the hair traps the shedding skin cells and makes them clump together before they fall. Dandruff is not a sign of bad hygiene on its own. In most cases, it is either slightly dry skin, a mild fungal condition involving a yeast called Malassezia that normally lives on everyone's scalp, or a skin condition called seborrheic dermatitis. Malassezia feeds on the natural oils your scalp produces, and in some people, the metabolic byproducts of that feeding irritate the skin and speed up cell turnover, which means more shedding and more visible flaking. It is extremely common. Anti-dandruff shampoos work by slowing fungal activity or normalizing cell turnover, depending on the formula. Your scalp is not broken. It is just running a slightly more aggressive version of a process every human scalp is doing all the time. Earwax. Earwax is one of those things that seems unpleasant until you understand what would happen without it. The ear canal is warm, slightly moist, and open to the outside world. Without any protection, it would be an excellent environment for bacteria and fungi to set up permanently. Earwax is the solution. It is produced by glands in the outer ear canal, and it is genuinely antimicrobial. It traps dust, dead skin cells, and microorganisms before they can reach the eardrum. And the ear is actually self-cleaning. The skin of the ear canal grows outward from the eardrum, slowly migrating old wax and debris toward the outside. Chewing and jaw movement helps push it further along. The reason ear problems happen is usually when people interfere with this process by sticking things in their ears, which just pushes wax deeper and compacts it against the eardrum. Earwax impaction is almost always caused by humans trying to clean something that cleans itself. The old advice about not putting anything smaller than your elbow in your ear is not a joke. It is genuinely the right answer. Leave it alone, and it sorts itself out. Start cleaning it aggressively, and you will eventually block it yourself. Farts. The average person passes gas somewhere between 10 and 25 times a day, which is a number that surprises people who think of it as occasional and embarrassing, rather than constant and inevitable. Your large intestine is populated by trillions of bacteria, collectively known as the gut microbiome, and they are actively fermenting carbohydrates that your small intestine could not fully break down and absorb. The gas produced during that fermentation process has to go somewhere. Some of it is reabsorbed into the bloodstream and eventually exhaled through the lungs. The The rest exits the other way. The smell comes from a small fraction of the gas that contains sulfur compounds, particularly foods high in sulfur, like eggs, meat, cruciferous vegetables, and certain legumes tend to produce more pungent results. But the gas itself is mostly odorless, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane. A very active and diverse gut microbiome tends to produce more gas because more fermentation is happening, which means the person eating the most fiber and the most varied diet is sometimes also the person producing the most gas. That is not a problem. That is a healthy gut doing its job. The embarrassing part is just an acoustic side effect. And speaking of things that are actually working properly when they seem like they are not, eating in a way that actively supports your gut bacteria instead of starving them is easier than most people think. My cookbook has 102 recipes built around real food that is high in protein, lower in calories, and designed to taste good without requiring you to be a chef or spend an hour in the kitchen every night. It is half off right now for just $14.999. First link in the description. Sweat. Humans are extraordinarily good at sweating compared to almost every other animal on Earth. We have between 2 and 4 million sweat glands spread across our bodies, and the capacity to produce several liters of sweat per hour during intense heat or exercise. This is actually a major evolutionary advantage. Most mammals cool down by panting, which requires stopping and resting. Humans can keep moving while cooling down, which is thought to be part of how early humans could persistence hunt, following prey across long distances in heat that would eventually overheat the animal, even if it was faster in short bursts. The sweat itself is mostly water, with small amounts of salt, trace minerals, and other compounds. The smell associated with sweat is not the sweat itself, but the result of bacteria on the skin breaking it down. Eccrine glands, which cover most of the body, produce the watery sweat used primarily for cooling. Apocrine glands, concentrated in the armpits and groin, produce a thicker secretion that bacteria find particularly productive to work with, which is where body odor mostly originates. The system is working perfectly. The smell is just a maintenance issue. Vomiting. Vomiting is one of the more dramatic things your body does, and it is coordinated in a way that makes it clear this is a well-designed emergency response rather than something just going wrong. The process is triggered by the vomiting center in the brainstem, which receives signals from the gut, the bloodstream, the inner ear, and higher brain regions. When something in any of those systems signals danger, the process begins. The stomach contracts in reverse. The diaphragm and abdominal muscles create pressure. The oesophageal sphincter opens, and contents are expelled rapidly. The reasons the body does this include the detection of toxins in the stomach or bloodstream, inner ear disturbances during motion sickness, extreme pain, infection, or even certain emotional states. The key purpose is to remove something potentially dangerous before it can be further absorbed. Animals that cannot vomit, horses and rats being the most commonly cited examples, are much more vulnerable to certain types of poisoning because they have no fast exit mechanism. Your ability to vomit, as unpleasant as it is your digestive system's emergency brake. The nausea that comes before it is the warning light telling you the brake might be needed. Diarrhea. Similar logic applies here, but operating at the other end of the digestive system. When your body detects something problematic in the lower digestive tract, whether that is a pathogen, a toxin, or a substance it is decided it wants out fast, it speeds up motility dramatically. The large intestine normally absorbs water from digested material as it passes through, which is what produces a formed stool. When the gut is rushing material through as fast as possible, there is not enough time for that water absorption to happen. The result is liquid. The reason your body is willing to lose large amounts of water and electrolytes to do this is that it has calculated, at a biological level, that the cost of keeping whatever is in there is higher than the cost of the dehydration. And for pathogens like cholera or certain types of food poisoning bacteria, it is actually correct. Slowing diarrhea down with medication when there is a genuine bacterial infection can sometimes backfire because you are keeping the pathogens in the gut longer. In cases of simple food intolerance or mild irritation, stopping it early is usually fine. But as a base mechanic, diarrhea is just your gut trying to flush the system, and the discomfort is the price of that protection working. Your feet are constantly cold. Cold feet that have nothing to do with the temperature of the room are one of the more overlooked early signs that something is not right with circulation or thyroid function. Your feet and hands are at the end of the circulatory line, which means they are the first places to feel it when blood is not moving efficiently. Persistent cold feet can indicate poor circulation from cardiovascular issues, early peripheral artery disease, anemia where the blood is not carrying enough oxygen, or an underactive thyroid, which slows metabolism and reduces the body's ability to generate and distribute heat. If your feet are routinely cold while the rest of your body is warm, or if they are noticeably colder than your hands in the same environment, it is worth paying attention to. If they also go pale, numb, or bluish, that is even less normal. Most people dismiss it as just being someone who runs cold. It is often more than that. You bruise very easily. Everyone bruises occasionally. Bruising easily from minor bumps you barely noticed, or finding bruises you have no memory of getting, suggests that something is off with either the integrity of your blood vessel walls or your blood's ability to clot properly. Deficiencies in vitamin C or vitamin K can both contribute to this, since both play roles in vessel wall strength and clotting. Low platelet counts, liver disease affecting clotting factor production, and certain medications, including blood thinners and some anti-inflammatories, also cause it. Aging skin bruises a bit more easily too, but that is usually gradual. The red flag is when it becomes noticeably easier than it used to be, or the bruises are bigger and darker than the bump deserved. If your skin is bruising from very minor contact regularly, and this is a change from your normal pattern, it is not something to ignore and attribute to being clumsy. Your tongue has a thick white or yellow coating. A healthy tongue should be pink and lightly coated. A thick white or yellow coating that persists after brushing and hydrating is a sign that bacterial overgrowth, yeast, or digestive imbalance is happening. White coating specifically can indicate oral candidiasis, which is a yeast overgrowth often associated with recent antibiotic use, a weakened immune system, or high sugar intake. A yellow coating more often suggests digestive issues, liver or gallbladder strain, or dehydration combined with excess bacterial activity. Traditional medicine systems have used tongue assessment as a diagnostic tool for centuries. Modern medicine largely moved away from it, but the basic observation that a heavily coated tongue reflects something going on internally is not wrong. You are losing hair in places other than your head. Eyebrow thinning, particularly at the outer third of the eyebrow, is a fairly well-known sign of hypothyroidism. The thyroid affects hair follicle cycling throughout the body, and an underactive thyroid slows that cycle, causing thinning or loss in areas that are less noticed than the scalp. Loss of leg hair, loss of pubic hair, or reduced body hair overall in an adult can similarly indicate thyroid issues or poor circulation to those areas. In some cases, it can also reflect nutrient deficiencies, especially iron, zinc, or protein inadequacy, because hair is one of the first things the body starts economizing on when resources are low. Hair loss is obviously multifactorial and happens for many reasons, but most people only notice scalp hair loss and never think to check whether their eyebrows are becoming less full than they used to be, which can be one of the earlier visible signs of a thyroid that is not functioning properly. Your nails have vertical ridges, or unusual spots. Nails are surprisingly reliable indicators of internal health. Vertical ridges that run from the base of the nail to the tip are usually just a normal aging change and not concerning. But deep horizontal ridges called Bowes lines indicate that nail growth was interrupted at a specific point in time by a significant illness, nutritional deficiency, or period of high stress. White spots across multiple nails are often a sign of zinc deficiency. Nails that are pale rather than pink underneath can indicate anemia. Nails that curve upward at the edges, called koilonychia or spoon nails, are associated with iron deficiency anemia specifically. Yellowing nails can suggest fungal infection, respiratory disease, or lymphatic issues. Clubbing, where the fingertips become bulbous and the nails curve around them, can sometimes point to chronic lung or heart problems. Nails that are consistently brittle and splitting despite adequate hydration often indicate protein, biotin, or iron insufficiency. People rarely look at their nails as health information, and they are actually carrying quite a lot of it. And while we are on the subject of your body quietly giving you signals, a lot of people do the same thing with food. They ignore the obvious basics, then go hunting for some magical fix later. That is exactly why I made the Blandest Band cookbook. It is 102 recipes that are high in protein, lower in calories, easy to make, and actually taste good. Stuff like burgers, wraps, pizzas, fries, desserts, normal food, just built in a way that helps you stay leaner without hating your life. It is half off right now. First link in the description. Also, summer's coming up fast, and I just dropped my brand new Summer Shred. It's a 6-week fat loss system with a personalized meal plan. Real meals you'll actually want to eat, and none of the boring diet food crap. If you want to lean down for summer, check out my week Summer Shred program. It's 50% off right now for launch, so make sure you take advantage of the sale and go get it. First link in the description below. Your sleep is always disturbed, and you wake up tired regardless of how long you slept. Waking up tired after a full night of sleep is not just about sleep duration. It usually means sleep quality is poor, and the most common reasons for poor sleep quality that people do not investigate are sleep apnea, where breathing interruptions fragment sleep throughout the night, blood sugar instability, where overnight glucose fluctuations cause the body to rouse, chronic inflammation which disrupts the hormonal signals that regulate deep sleep, or deficiencies in magnesium and vitamin D. both of which play significant roles in sleep architecture. People who wake up unrefreshed regularly tend to assume they just need more hours, when the issue is rarely the quantity and almost always the quality. Loud snoring, waking with a dry mouth, waking to pee multiple times, and morning headaches all make sleep apnea much more likely. If you sleep 8 hours and wake up feeling like you slept 4, something physiological is interfering with your sleep cycles. You have chronic bad breath, even with good dental hygiene. If you brush, floss, and use mouthwash consistently and still deal with persistent bad breath, the source is probably not your mouth. Breath that originates from elsewhere in the body is a sign of something happening systemically. A fruity or acetone-like smell can indicate diabetic ketoacidosis, where the body is burning fat for fuel in the absence of adequate insulin. A fishy smell that is genuinely systemic, rather than related to recent food, can indicate kidney dysfunction, where waste compounds begin accumulating in the blood and released through breath. A fecal smell, despite clean teeth, often points to issues in the digestive tract, including bacterial overgrowth or motility problems. And chronic postnasal drip from sinus issues can coat the back of the throat with bacteria-laden mucus that produces persistent odor no amount of mouthwash reaches. Reflux can also do it, especially if stomach contents are repeatedly coming up into the throat. Treat the breath problem as a signal, not just a social inconvenience. Your gums bleed when you brush or floss. Bleeding gums are not normal. Most people accept them as just a sensitivity thing or something that happens when they have not flossed in a while. But healthy gums do not bleed from routine brushing and flossing. Bleeding gums indicate inflammation of the gum tissue, which is almost always the result of bacterial buildup at the gum line that the immune system is actively fighting. Left unaddressed, this progresses from gingivitis to periodontitis, where the inflammation begins breaking down the bone, supporting the teeth. And the connection to systemic health goes further. Chronic gum inflammation is associated with elevated systemic inflammatory markers and has been linked in research to increased cardiovascular risk, worsened blood sugar control in diabetics, and adverse pregnancy outcomes. The bacteria involved in gum disease can enter the bloodstream through inflamed gum tissue. So if your gums bleed every time you brush, that is not your toothbrush being too aggressive. It is your body telling you the tissue is inflamed. Bleeding gums are a mouth problem, but they are also a body problem. You get sick frequently, and it takes you longer than normal to recover. Getting sick several times a year, and then needing 2 to 3 weeks to fully recover from something that most people shake off in a week, is a sign that your immune system is either chronically depleted or chronically occupied with something else. The most common suppressors of immune function that people are not aware of are chronic sleep deficiency, which significantly reduces natural killer selectivity, chronic psychological stress, which keeps cortisol elevated and directly suppresses immune response, nutritional deficiencies, particularly vitamin D, zinc, and vitamin C, and chronic gut inflammation, since a large proportion of immune function is coordinated from gut-associated lymphatic tissue. It can also happen when someone is overtraining hard while undereating, which is basically a perfect recipe for suppressing recovery. If you feel like your immune system is always one step behind, the question is not how to boost it with supplements, but what is draining it. Your urine is consistently dark, and you are not dehydrated. Most people know that dark urine usually means you need to drink more water, and that is often true. But if your urine is consistently dark amber or brown, despite drinking enough fluid, the problem may not be hydration. Liver issues can cause bilirubin, a waste product from red blood cell breakdown, to appear in urine, turning it dark. Certain kidney conditions can cause blood or myoglobin to appear in urine, producing a cola-brown color. Hemolysis, where red blood cells are breaking down faster than normal, also discolors urine. Some medications and foods cause temporary discoloration that is harmless, but persistent dark urine in someone who is well hydrated is something to investigate. If it is paired with pale stools, yellowing of the eyes, swelling, or flank pain, that becomes even more suspicious. Urine is one of the easiest and most accessible windows into what your kidneys, liver, and blood are doing, and most people never pay any attention to it beyond noticing it exists. Vitamin C. Vitamin C is water-soluble, which means your body does not store it the way it stores fat-soluble vitamins. Excess gets filtered out through the kidneys and excreted in urine. This makes it much harder to seriously overdose on compared to other vitamins. But taking very large doses, somewhere above 2,000 milligrams a day, will cause gastrointestinal problems. Stomach cramps, nausea, and diarrhea are the main ones. This is so consistent that it is sometimes referred to as bowel tolerance, meaning you will know you have taken too much when your digestive system starts telling you loudly. Long-term, very high supplementation can also increase the risk of kidney stones in people who are prone to them, because the excess oxalate produced when vitamin C breaks down can contribute to stone formation. It is not going to kill you, but it will absolutely make you miserable in the bathroom, which is probably enough to discourage it. Vitamin D. This one is more serious because vitamin D is fat-soluble. Fat-soluble vitamins accumulate in body tissue rather than being flushed out, which means toxicity can build up over time with consistent high dosing. Vitamin D toxicity, called hypervitaminosis D, causes elevated calcium levels in the blood, a condition called hypercalcemia. And hypercalcemia causes nausea, vomiting, weakness, frequent urination, kidney pain, and in severe cases, kidney failure and calcification of soft tissues. This is not something that happens from sunlight or from normal supplementation. You need to be consistently taking very high doses, usually well above 10,000 international units per day, for a prolonged period to get there. But the cases exist, and some of them have ended in hospitalization. The popular trend of megadosing vitamin D without testing levels first is genuinely risky for this reason. Vitamin A. Vitamin A is another fat-soluble one, and its toxicity profile is more established and more dramatic than vitamin D. Acute vitamin A toxicity from a massive single dose causes nausea, vomiting, headache, blurred vision, dizziness, and in extreme cases intracranial pressure that produces symptoms resembling a brain injury. Chronic toxicity from consistently high doses builds up in the liver, causing liver damage over time. It also causes hair loss, dry skin, bone pain, and joint problems. Vitamin A toxicity during pregnancy is particularly serious because excess vitamin A is a known teratogen, meaning it can cause birth defects. This is why retinol-based supplements and high-dose vitamin A are specifically warned against during pregnancy. Eating a large amount of liver regularly can actually push people into this territory because liver is one of the most concentrated dietary sources of preformed vitamin A. Iron. Iron is one of the more dangerous supplements to take carelessly, particularly for children. Accidental iron poisoning from children. Accessing adult iron supplements used to be one of the leading causes of supplement-related death in children in the United States before safety packaging became standard. In adults, acute iron overdose causes a recognizable progression. Initial gastrointestinal damage with nausea, vomiting and bloody diarrhea, followed by an apparent recovery period, followed by a second severe phase involving liver damage, metabolic acidosis, and in serious cases, multi-organ failure. Chronic excess iron supplementation in adults who do not need it causes iron to accumulate in organs, including the liver, heart, and pancreas, which over a long period leads to damage in all of them. Iron supplementation should really only be done under medical supervision when there is a confirmed deficiency, because healthy people have no reliable way to excrete excess iron, and the accumulation causes real harm. Zinc. Zinc in high doses causes copper deficiency. This is one of the less obvious supplement interaction issues that catches people off guard. Zinc and copper compete for the same absorption pathway in the gut, so consistently high zinc intake suppresses copper absorption over time. Copper deficiency leads to neurological problems, including weakness, numbness, balance issues, and a condition resembling subacute combined degeneration of the spinal cord. Beyond the copper interaction, high acute doses of zinc also cause nausea and vomiting. And zinc in nasal spray form, which was sold as a cold remedy for a period, was linked to permanent loss of smell in some users. The product was eventually recalled. Zinc is an essential mineral, but the therapeutic window is narrower than most people assume when they buy it in high-dose supplement form. Magnesium. Magnesium toxicity from food alone is essentially impossible because the kidneys are very efficient at excreting excess magnesium. But supplements, particularly in high doses, can cause problems in people with impaired kidney function who cannot excrete it normally. In healthy people, taking too much supplemental magnesium generally just causes osmotic diarrhea. The magnesium draws water into the bowel. It is unpleasant but not dangerous. This is actually why magnesium is used as a laxative in certain forms. In people with kidney disease, however, excess magnesium can accumulate and cause low blood pressure, slowed breathing, muscle weakness, and in severe cases, cardiac arrest. Most healthy people supplementing magnesium for sleep or muscle recovery are not at serious risk, but the kidney caveat is important. And while we are talking about what supplements actually do at the wrong doses, my cookbook is an example of what doing things the right way actually looks like. 102 recipes, high in protein, lower in calories, designed around real food rather than pills and powders. It is half off right now for just $14.99. First link in the description. Creatine. Creatine is one of the most studied supplements in existence, and also one of the ones with the most persistent myths attached to it. It does not damage kidneys in healthy people. That fear came from early studies that measured creatinine, a waste product of creatine metabolism, in the blood, and confused elevated creatinine levels with kidney damage. In people with pre-existing kidney problems, high-dose creatine supplementation is still something to discuss with a doctor, but for healthy individuals, the evidence consistently shows no kidney harm at normal doses. Taking large amounts beyond the standard 3 to 5 grams per day primarily just results in the excess being excreted in urine. The loading phase of 20 grams per day that some protocols suggest can cause stomach cramps and diarrhea in some people. That is really about as dramatic as creatine toxicity gets for a healthy user. Protein powder. Protein powder is food. Technically, overdosing on it is the same as overdosing on any dietary protein source. Very high protein intakes over a long period can put additional strain on the kidneys in people with existing kidney disease, similar to high dietary protein in general. In healthy people with normal kidney function, the research does not show meaningful harm from high protein intake. The practical problem with drinking enormous amounts of protein powder is usually just digestive discomfort. Many protein powders contain lactose, artificial sweeteners, or additives that cause bloating and gas at high doses. Whey protein in large quantities is also calorically significant and contributes to body fat if total intake exceeds output, which surprises people who think protein is automatically good, regardless of quantity. Melatonin. Melatonin is widely treated as completely harmless because it is a hormone your body produces naturally, and it is sold as a supplement without prescription in most countries. But the doses sold in supplements, typically 1 to 10 milligrams, are often dramatically higher than the physiological amounts your body actually produces, which are closer to 0.1 to 0.3 milligrams. Consistently taking high doses of melatonin may suppress your body's own melatonin production over time, interfere with other hormonal systems, and disrupt the natural rhythm it is supposed to be supporting. Children and adolescents are especially vulnerable because melatonin interacts with reproductive hormone development. Short-term use at the lower end of the dose range for jet lag or shift work adjustment is generally considered safe. Using 5 or 10 milligrams every night indefinitely as a sleep aid is a different conversation that most people are not having. Pre-workout and stimulants. Pre-workout supplements typically contain caffeine, and often at doses significantly higher than a strong coffee. Some products contain 200 to 400 milligrams of caffeine per serving, which for a person who does not regularly consume caffeine can cause a rapid heart rate, elevated blood pressure, anxiety, tremors, and in rare cases with extremely high doses, cardiac events. The cases of deaths connected to pre-workout supplements have usually involved products containing stimulants like DMAA or other compounds that were later banned. But even caffeine at high enough doses is genuinely dangerous. A caffeine overdose causes seizures, cardiac arrhythmias, and can be fatal. The amount required is high, but concentrated caffeine powders have caused deaths. Taking 3 scoops of a high-stimulant pre-workout because 1 scoop did not feel like enough is the kind of decision that sends people to hospital. The stimulant is doing something real to your cardiovascular system, and treating it like a harmless energy boost scales badly when you push the dose. Fish oil. High-dose fish oil supplementation, usually above 3 to 4 grams of combined EPA and DHA per day, has notable blood-thinning effects. For most people, this is either irrelevant or mildly beneficial. But for people taking blood thinners, about to have surgery, or with clotting disorders, excess fish oil can increase bleeding risk significantly. There is also some evidence that very high-dose fish oil supplementation over long periods increases the risk of atrial fibrillation, a heart rhythm irregularity. A large clinical trial found a higher rate of atrial fibrillation in people taking 4 grams per day of a prescription fish oil product compared to controls. It is not a reason to avoid fish oil at normal doses, but it is a reason why very high-dose supplementation without medical guidance is not as harmless as people assume. Walking after meals. This is one of those habits that sounds way too small to do anything, which is exactly why most people skip it. They want a fix that feels like a fix. They want some big complicated routine they can post about. A walk after dinner does not feel like that, so the brain dismisses it. The problem is, this little habit might do more for your daily health than half the supplements people are buying. When you eat, your blood sugar climbs. That is normal. The issue is what happens next. If you sit down on the couch right after eating, that sugar just sits in your bloodstream for longer, your insulin has to spike harder, and your body slowly gets worse at handling carbs over time. Walking changes that almost immediately. Your muscles start using up that glucose as fuel the second they move, which flattens the spike and stops that heavy, sleepy food coma feeling that makes you write off your entire evening. It also helps digestion. Movement physically pushes things along through your gut so you feel less bloated and less wrecked after big meals. And nobody is asking you to walk for an hour. 10 to 15 minutes is enough to change the math. Around the block, around the house, around the parking lot at work. It is the most low-effort, high-return habit in existence. And the people who actually do it consistently end up looking and feeling like they are doing way more than they actually are. Morning sunlight. Your body has a clock, not a metaphorical one, a real biological one running in the back of your head. And it is way more important than people realize. That clock decides when you feel awake, when you feel sleepy, when you feel hungry, when your hormones spike, and when your brain switches gears. The thing that sets that clock every single day is light. Specifically, sunlight in your eyes early in the morning. When you walk outside in the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking up, your brain gets a clear signal that says it is the start of the day, cortisol rises sharply on purpose, melatonin shuts off cleanly, and your whole system gets organized. The knock-on effects are huge. You feel more awake earlier in the day instead of taking 3 hours and 2 coffees to come online. Your sleep that night gets deeper because the brain knows when to start producing melatonin again about 14 to 16 hours later. Your mood usually lifts because morning sunlight has a measurable effect on serotonin production. The wild part is, this is free. It costs nothing. You do not need a special lamp. You do not need a routine. You do not need an app. 5 to 10 minutes outside. No sunglasses, no staring at the sun like a lunatic. Just letting normal daylight hit your eyes. People who do this for a couple of weeks are usually shocked by how much better they sleep at night, even though they did not change anything about their actual bedtime. Your sleep starts in the morning, not at night. That is the whole trick. Creatine. Creatine has the worst PR of any supplement on earth. Most people still think it is something only meatheads in tank tops take, when it is actually one of the most studied supplements in human history, and one of the few that has held up under decades of research. The way it works is simple. Your muscles and your brain both run on a molecule called ATP, which is basically the energy currency your cells use to do anything. Creatine helps your body recycle ATP faster. That is why it makes you stronger in the gym. You can squeeze out an extra rep, you can lift slightly heavier, you recover better between sets. But the part most people miss is what it does outside the gym. Your brain is one of the most energy-hungry organs in your body, and creatine has been shown to help with mental fatigue, cognitive performance, and even mood, especially in people who are sleep-deprived or running on fumes. 5 grams a day, every day. Doesn't matter when you take it, doesn't matter if you skip a day occasionally, doesn't matter if you take it with food or without. It is the most idiot-proof supplement in existence. Cheap, safe, well-studied, and useful for both your training and your brain. If anyone is still scared of it because of a rumor they heard in 2009, it is time to let that go. Breathwork. Most people think breathwork sounds like something a yoga teacher made up to sell candles. And that is fair, because a lot of it does sound like that. But the basic version actually works, and it works fast. Here is the thing. Your nervous system has 2 main settings. Fight or flight, where your heart rate is up, your breathing is shallow, your shoulders are tight, and your brain is convinced something is about to go wrong. And rest and digest, where your body chills out, digestion works properly, and your head feels clear. Most modern adults are stuck in the first one all day for no good reason. Notifications, deadlines, traffic, doom scrolling, all of it keeps the body on high alert, even when nothing is actually happening. The fastest way to flip that switch, without needing meditation, journaling, or 2 weeks at a silent retreat, is to slow your exhale down. Breathe in for 4 seconds, breathe out for 8. Do that for 2 minutes. Or try the physiological sigh. 2 short inhales through the nose, followed by 1 long slow exhale through the mouth. Within 30 seconds, your heart rate drops, your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, and your brain stops acting like there is a tiger in the room. The reason this matters for your health is because chronic stress quietly destroys sleep, digestion, recovery, mood, hormones, and body composition. Most people cannot remove the things that stress them out, but they can give their nervous system a few minutes a day where it remembers what calm actually feels like. That alone changes things. Magnesium. This is the deficiency nobody talks about, and the symptoms are sneaky enough that people spend years assuming they are just stressed, just tired, just a bad sleeper. Magnesium is involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. It plays a role in muscle function, nerve signaling, sleep regulation, blood pressure, and even how your body handles stress. The problem is, most modern diets are way lower in magnesium than people realize. The food supply has changed, the soil quality has changed, and a lot of the foods that used to deliver decent magnesium just do not anymore. Add coffee, alcohol, sweating, and stress on top of that, all of which deplete magnesium further, and you end up with a huge chunk of the population running on barely enough. The signs are vague, which is why they get missed. Trouble falling asleep? Waking up at 3 in the morning for no reason. Muscle twitches around the eyes, tight calves, restless legs, feeling wired but tired, constant low-grade tension in the jaw and shoulders, feeling more anxious than your life justifies, constipation that does not match your fiber intake. The fix is simple. Eat more leafy greens, nuts, seeds, beans. dark chocolate. And if a supplement makes more sense for your life, magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate are the two forms that actually absorb well. Stay away from magnesium oxide if you do not want to spend the next morning very close to a bathroom. People who finally fix their magnesium are usually shocked by how much smoother their sleep, mood, and recovery get without doing anything else. And while we are on the topic of stupidly simple things that change everything, food is the biggest one nobody wants to deal with. Most people get the gym side of their life sorted long before the food side, and that is the exact reason the results never match the effort they are putting in. That is why I made the Bland is Banned cookbook. It is 102 high protein, lower calorie recipes that actually taste like real food you would want to eat. Burgers, wraps, pizzas, fries, desserts. The kind of stuff people assume they have to give up to get lean. You do not. The whole point of the cookbook is that you stop forcing yourself to suffer through bland diet food and start eating meals that work for your body and your taste buds at the same time. And if you want the full structured version of this, the Summer Shred program is a 6-week program built specifically to get you in the best shape of your life for summer. And the free copy of Bland is Banned comes with it. Both are now available at half price. First link in the description. Mouth taping. On paper, this sounds like the dumbest hack on the internet. People literally putting a piece of tape on their mouth before bed. The first time you hear it, your brain rejects it. But there is actually a real reason this caught on. And it has nothing to do with TikTok. Your nose is not just a hole in your face. It filters air, warms it, humidifies it, and produces nitric oxide, which helps blood vessels open up and oxygen get into your tissues better. When you breathe through your mouth all night, none of that happens. You are basically running raw, dry, unfiltered air directly into your lungs for 8 hours straight. The downstream effects are not small. Worse sleep quality, dry mouth in the morning, more cavities, bad breath, snoring, a higher chance of mild sleep apnea. Some people even wake up multiple times a night without realizing it, just because their body keeps having to readjust to mouth breathing. Mouth taping forces nasal breathing while you sleep, which means your airway works the way it was actually designed to. People who try it usually report deeper sleep, less morning grogginess, less snoring, and waking up without that gross dry throat feeling. The catch is, mouth taping is not for everyone. If you have a deviated septum, sinus issues, untreated sleep apnea, or just cannot breathe through your nose comfortably during the day, fix that first before sticking tape on your face overnight. Use a small piece of gentle tape over the center of your lips, not a full strip across your whole mouth. The goal is a nudge, not a seal. Sleep cycle timing. You ever sleep 8 hours and wake up feeling like garbage? Then sleep 6 hours another night and feel weirdly fine. That is not random. That is sleep cycle timing. Your sleep is not one long stretch of being unconscious. It is a series of cycles, roughly 90 minutes each, where you cycle from light sleep into deep sleep, then into REM, then back to light. If your alarm goes off in the middle of deep sleep, you feel like you have been hit by a truck, no matter how many hours you slept. If it goes off near the end of a cycle, in light sleep, you feel like you got a decent night, even if it was shorter. The fix is to count backwards from when you need to wake up in 90-minute chunks and add about 15 minutes of fall asleep buffer time. So if you have to be up at 6, going to bed at 10:30 or 12 will line you up better than going at 11:30. It is not perfect. Sleep cycles vary slightly from person to person, but it is way better than the random way most people pick their bedtime. The other half of this is consistency. Sleeping and waking at roughly the same times every day, even on weekends, lets your brain sync the cycles properly. People who do this stop needing alarms entirely because their body learns the schedule and starts waking them up naturally near the end of a cycle. Quality of sleep is way more important than quantity, and timing is half of quality. Psyllium husk. This is the most boring product that exists, and also one of the most useful. It is fiber. That is it. Powdered fiber from a plant. Not glamorous, not exciting, not influencer friendly, and that is exactly why it works. Most people are eating roughly half the fiber they actually need, and the consequences of that show up in places they would never connect to fiber. Constant snacking, blood sugar that is all over the place. Constipation people just accept as normal. Cholesterol creeping up year after year. Hunger that never seems to switch off. Psyllium husk fixes a chunk of this in the most unsexy way possible. You stir a teaspoon into water, drink it, and it expands in your stomach into a thick gel that slows down how fast food empties out of you. That gel does several things at once. It keeps you full for way longer than the calories suggest, so your appetite finally calms down. It slows the absorption of sugar from the meal it is paired with, which flattens the post-meal energy crash. It physically helps move things through your digestive tract, so people who have been quietly miserable for years suddenly feel 10 kilos lighter without losing any actual weight. And there is solid research showing it lowers LDL cholesterol over time. The catch is, you have to drink enough water with it. Otherwise, you will feel like you swallowed cement. Start with 1 teaspoon, work up to 1 tablespoon, and watch how much it changes your hunger and digestion in about a week. Face plunge. This one looks insane, but the biology behind it is actually elegant. Your body has something called the mammalian dive reflex. It is hardwired into you. Splash cold water on your face, especially around your eyes, nose, and forehead, and your body immediately thinks it is going underwater. Heart rate drops, blood pressure drops, blood gets redirected to your core, your nervous system flips out of fight or flight mode within seconds. This is not a placebo. It is an old survival adaptation that humans share with seals and dolphins, and you can use it on demand. The applications are stupidly practical. Panic attack starting? Face in a bowl of cold water for 30 seconds. Anxious before a big call or presentation? Splash the sink onto your face a few times. Cannot sleep because your brain is racing? Cold water on the face, especially around the eyes, drops your nervous system back into rest mode faster than any breathing exercise. People who deal with chronic anxiety quietly use this all the time, and most of them learned it by accident. You do not need an ice bath. You do not need a fancy plunge tub. A bowl of cold water in your kitchen sink is enough. 40 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, around 5 to 15 Celsius. Dunked for 15 to 30 seconds, and your nervous system has no choice but to recalibrate. Dopamine reset. This is a cheat code most people need the most and want the least. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical, even though that is how everyone talks about it. It is the motivation chemical. It is what makes you actually want to do things. The problem is, modern life has rigged the system. Phones, short-form videos, junk food, gambling apps, porn, constant notifications, all of these hit your dopamine system harder and faster than anything humans evolved with. When your brain is constantly getting hits of huge dopamine spikes from scrolling and snacking, regular life starts to feel gray by comparison. Going for a walk feels boring. Reading feels boring. Cooking real food feels boring. Going to the gym feels boring. People assume they have lost motivation, that they are lazy, that something is wrong with them. Their dopamine system is just exhausted from being slammed with cheap hits all day. The reset is uncomfortable, but it works. Cut the biggest dopamine hijackers for a week or two. Less scrolling, less junk food, less constant content, less anything that is engineered to be addictive. The first 3 days feel awful. You will be bored. You will feel restless. You will reach for your phone 50 times without thinking. Push through it. By day 5 or 6, regular activities start feeling rewarding again. Food tastes better. Workouts feel more engaging. Conversations feel more interesting. You stop needing massive amounts of stimulation to feel alive. That is not magic. That is your brain finally rebalancing after months or years of being overstimulated. People underestimate how much of their motivation problem is actually a dopamine problem. Fix the dopamine and the discipline they have been chasing for years just shows up on its own. Your tailbone. This is the coccyx. It is a small cluster of fused vertebrae sitting at the very bottom of your spine, and it is basically the leftover stub of what used to be a tail. Your evolutionary ancestors had tails that helped with balance and movement. Over millions of years, those tails got shorter and shorter as they became less necessary, and the coccyx is what was left after evolution just sort of stopped caring. It serves almost no function today. Some pelvic floor muscles do attach to it, which is the argument people use to say it matters, but those muscles could anchor themselves elsewhere just fine. What the tailbone mostly does now is sit there and wait for you to fall directly on it, which is one of the most disproportionately painful injuries a human can have. You break your tailbone and there is nothing to do but wait. You cannot cast it, you cannot splint it, you just sit on a donut pillow for weeks and regret your entire existence. There is also a small percentage of people born with a vestigial external tail, an actual soft tissue tail, which surgeons remove at birth. The coccyx is really just a version of that story where the tail did not quite make it to the outside. Your wisdom teeth. Somewhere between 2 and 3 million years ago, your ancestors had much bigger jaws than you do. They needed them because they were eating raw plant material, tough, unprocessed meat, and fibrous roots that required serious grinding power. The third molars that grew in at the back of the mouth were genuinely useful. Then humans started cooking food, which made everything softer. Jaws gradually became smaller over evolutionary time because they did not need to be as large. But the wisdom teeth kept coming anyway, because evolution does not clean up quickly. And now you have a smaller jaw trying to accommodate teeth that were designed for a bigger one. Which is why so many people end up with wisdom teeth that grow in at weird angles, crowd other teeth, or get stuck inside the jaw completely. Around 35% of people are now born without wisdom teeth at all, which is evolution actually catching up in real time. The rest of us get to spend a few days eating ice cream and looking like a squirrel. Most of your body hair. The hair covering most of your body is basically a feature that has not fully updated its settings since you were a much hairier animal. Your distant ancestors needed body hair for warmth and protection, similar to what you see in other primates today. As humans evolved, we lost most of our heavy body coverage, probably because we developed other ways to regulate temperature, started making tools and clothing, and moved through different climates. But the hair follicles themselves are still there, mostly doing nothing useful. Armpit and pubic hair do retain some function as friction reducers, and possibly as carriers for chemical signals. But the fine hair on your arms and legs and back is really just leftover infrastructure nobody got around to removing. It does give you goosebumps though, which brings us to the next one. And while we are talking about things your body might not actually need, one thing you actually do need is food that works for you instead of against you. My cookbook has 102 recipes built around exactly that. High in protein, lower in calories, easy to prepare, and they taste like something a real person would actually want to eat. Not something you force down because you're trying to be healthy. The kind of food that just becomes normal once you start cooking it. It covers breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and everything in between, so you are not stuck eating the same 3 things every week. It is half off right now for just $14.99, down from $29.99. First link in the description. Or, if you don't want a cookbook filled with delicious and health-conscious meals, then you can get a free daily meal plan with the second link in the description. Summer is coming up. Let's lock in. Goosebumps. When you are cold or frightened, tiny muscles attached to your hair follicles contract and pull the hair upright. In animals with thick fur, this actually does something useful. It traps more air against the skin for insulation. In a threatened animal, it can also make them look bigger and more intimidating to a predator. In you, it just makes your arm look like the surface of an uncooked chicken, because you do not have enough hair for either of those effects to actually work. The reflex is still fully intact. The hardware it was designed to run on just is not there anymore. Your body is still doing the ancient safety protocol and getting absolutely nothing out of it. You do still get goosebumps from music sometimes, which is a completely different and actually interesting phenomenon tied to emotional processing and dopamine release. Scientists call it frisson. It is one of the stranger ways your nervous system expresses itself. But the cold and scared kind is pure biological memory, with nothing useful left to show for it. The palmaris longus muscle. Hold your hand out flat, touch your pinky and thumb together, and flex your wrist slightly. If you see a tendon pop up in the middle of your forearm, you have the palmaris longus. If you do not see anything, congratulations, you are among the roughly 14% of people who were born without it. Entirely. And here is the thing. The people without it have zero functional difference in grip strength, wrist mobility, or anything else compared to the people who do have it. It is a muscle that connects to nothing important and does nothing that other forearm muscles cannot handle without even noticing. The only time it ever becomes useful is when surgeons need a tendon to harvest for reconstruction procedures elsewhere in the body, which is convenient, but that is not really what it is there for. It is a leftover from ancestors who needed it for tree climbing. Surgeons are just making the most of the situation. Male nipples. This one is probably the most famous entry on this list, and also one of the more interesting from a developmental standpoint. Every human embryo starts out on the same developmental template in the first few weeks. The nipples form during that early window before the Y chromosome has had time to do anything. So by the time testosterone shows up and starts directing the development of male characteristics, the nipples are already there. Removing them at that point would require active intervention from the developmental process. And evolution does not bother with active intervention when something is harmless. So they stay, they do not cause any problems, they are not connected to anything functional in men. They are just there because the biological blueprint could not be bothered to clean up after itself. And honestly, that is a pretty good summary of vestigial structures in general. The whole body is essentially a renovation project where the builders just kept working on top of the old structure instead of starting fresh. Your appendix. This one might actually be less useless than people have been saying for about 100 years. The traditional story is that the appendix is a completely useless remnant of a digestive structure that helped your herbivore ancestors break down plant material. And for a long time that was the whole story. But more recent research suggests it might serve as a kind of reservoir for gut bacteria, particularly useful for repopulating the gut after severe diarrheal illness. It is also loaded with immune tissue. So it may do something, just nothing that is actually critical to your survival. Which is supported by the fact that people who have their appendix removed do absolutely fine without it. There is no measurable long-term health disadvantage. Your immune system compensates, your gut bacteria find other ways to recover. The appendix might be a backup system with limited importance rather than a completely dead organ. But if it decided to rupture right now, your surgeon would remove it and you would walk out of hospital and live a perfectly normal life. So useful in a vague optional kind of way. Critical to nobody. Your tonsils. The tonsils are 2 lumps of lymphatic tissue sitting at the back of your throat. and they are part of the immune system's first line of defense against pathogens entering through the mouth and nose. In theory, this sounds useful. In practice, they are so prone to recurrent infections, abscesses, and causing breathing problems during sleep that they are one of the most commonly removed organs in the human body. And again, people who have them out do not become meaningfully more susceptible to illness. The rest of the immune system handles everything without them. There is also a running theory that modern hygiene has left the tonsils without enough early childhood infections to properly train them. So instead of becoming experienced immune guards, they just sit there getting inflamed at minor irritants and overreacting constantly. Whether or not that is entirely accurate, the practical reality is that for a lot of people, the tonsils cause more problems than they prevent, and removing them tends to dramatically improve quality of life with essentially no downside. Tonsillitis used to be one of the leading reasons children missed school. Now a fairly routine surgery just eliminates the problem entirely, and the body does not even notice they are gone. Fixed mindset. This is the mindset where you quietly decide who you are way too early. You try something once, maybe twice, it feels awkward, you are not instantly good at it, and now your brain goes, yep, that is not me. I am just not disciplined. I am just not a business person. I am just not one of those people who can get lean. And once you start talking like that, every setback stops being a setback and starts becoming evidence. That is why fixed mindset is such a pain in the ass. It turns normal struggle into identity damage. Miss a week in the gym, and now suddenly you are not a guy who had a bad week. You are a lazy person. Eat badly for a few days, and now you are not someone who slipped up. You are just bad with food. One failed project, and you start acting like the universe personally reviewed your application and said no, not him. It kills health because you stop trying early. It kills success because you avoid anything that might expose you. And it kills drive because if you think the result is already written, effort starts feeling pointless. So people with a fixed mindset do not usually lose because they are incapable. They lose because they keep quitting before the reps even had a chance to work. Growth mindset. This is the one people love to post about because it sounds nice, but living it is a different story. Growth mindset means you stop acting shocked that being bad at something is the first step before being decent at it. Crazy concept, I know. It means you look at a struggle and think, okay, this is still under construction, not wow, this is proof I am doomed. And this mindset matters everywhere. In health, it means one bad weekend does not turn into a 2-month spiral, because you do not dramatize every slip-up like it is a spiritual collapse. In work, it means you can be bad at selling, bad at speaking, bad at leading, bad at making content, and not immediately decide that means you should stop. In the gym, it means you can look awkward, weak, or inconsistent in the beginning without treating that like a personal humiliation. Growth mindset keeps drive alive because effort actually feels connected to improvement. That is the whole game. Once you believe your actions can move the needle, discipline starts making more sense. That is also why both the Bland is Banned cookbook and the Summer Shred program exist. The cookbook gives you 102 high-protein, lower-calorie recipes that actually taste like real food you would want to eat. Burgers, wraps, pizzas, fries, desserts, all of that. And the Summer Shred program is a 6-week personalized program made exactly for you. So you are not just following some generic plan and pretending it is tailored to your life. It also comes with a free Bland is Banned cookbook. Both are half off for launch right now, so be quick if you want them while the sale is still on. First link in the description. Victim mindset. This one is uncomfortable because sometimes people really did get dealt a rough hand. Bad upbringing, bad luck, bad relationships, bad timing, real pain. Real unfairness, that part can be true. Victim mindset starts when that truth becomes the explanation for everything, forever. Now every problem is someone else's fault. Every setback is proof life is targeting you personally. Every hard thing becomes another reason to stay still. And the trap is it feels protective. If none of it is your responsibility, then none of it is your shame either. Nice. Very convenient. Also completely useless if you actually want your life to improve. Because the second you hand all the power away, you also hand your drive away. Why would you train hard if you think your life is rigged anyway? Why would you sort your food out, fix your habits, build a business, or get emotionally stronger if the script is already written against you? Victim mindset makes people passive, resentful, and weirdly attached to their own helplessness. It does not just hurt success, it hurts health too. People stop treating themselves like their actions matter. And after a while, the body starts reflecting that mentality right back at them. Ownership mindset. This is the opposite. And honestly, it is one of the most useful mindsets a person can have. Ownership mindset is basically asking, okay, maybe this is not fully my fault, but what is my move now? That is it. That one question already separates adults from people who just keep giving speeches about their circumstances. Ownership mindset does not mean blaming yourself for everything, like some exhausted lunatic. It means looking for leverage. Maybe your metabolism is average. Maybe your childhood gave you terrible habits. Maybe your job is frying your nervous system. Fine. What can you still control? What can you improve this week? What can you stop doing? What can you build? That mindset helps health because it gets you out of emotional paralysis. It helps success because businesses, relationships, and bodies do not improve through complaining. They improve through adjustment. Ownership mindset gives people drive because it gives them power back. Even a small amount of control feels energizing when you stop wasting all your energy staring at what is unfair. Scarcity mindset. This is the mindset of not enough. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough success, not enough attention, not enough opportunities. Somebody else wins, and your brain instantly acts like they stole food off your plate. It makes people desperate, and desperate people make trash decisions. In health, scarcity mindset shows up in weird ways. People hoard food mentally. They binge because the diet starts tomorrow. They treat one meal like it is their last legal pleasure on earth. They cannot just eat a burger and move on. It has to become an event. In business, it looks even uglier. They undercharge, cling to bad deals, overpromise, panic every slow week, and compare themselves into a coma because they think opportunity is running out by the minute. Scarcity mindset can create hustle, sure, but it is panic hustle. Very different thing. And panic is terrible fuel. It wrecks sleep, recovery, relationships, mood, and decision-making. The person looks driven from the outside, but internally, they are just operating in permanent famine mode. Abundance mindset. This is not that fake manifesting stuff where you whisper affirmations to your ceiling and wait for your bank account to have a spiritual awakening. It is much more normal than that. Abundance mindset means you believe opportunities can be made, skills can be built, and someone else doing well does not automatically mean there is less for you. That changes everything because it calms people down. They stop behaving like every conversation is a competition and every opportunity is the last helicopter out of the city. In health, abundance mindset lets people stop acting insane around food. One imperfect meal does not feel like failure. One missed session does not feel like the end. In work, it helps people collaborate instead of constantly comparing. It helps them think long-term instead of grabbing at every shiny thing out of fear. It does not mean you think resources are infinite. It just means you stop living like the room is on fire all the time. And that calm gives people way better drive because their effort is no longer contaminated by desperation. Short-term mindset. This is probably one of the most destructive mindsets in modern life because everything around you is designed to reward it. Scroll now, eat now, buy now, snooze now, skip now, order now. Feel better for 8 minutes and let tomorrow deal with the mess. That is short-term mindset in its purest form. It is basically letting current feelings run the whole operation. And listen, this is why so many people feel stuck even though they know what to do. They are not stupid, they are just overvaluing immediate relief. They keep choosing what feels better now over what would actually make life better later. That murders health because health is mostly delayed gratification. Better sleep, better fitness, better body composition, better blood work, better energy. None of it pays instantly. It also murders success because almost everything meaningful has a lag. Content takes time. Skills take time. Money takes time. Results take time. If your brain keeps demanding instant proof that something is worth doing, you will keep abandoning things right before they would have started paying you back. Long-term mindset. This is where a lot of successful, healthy people quietly separate themselves from everybody else. Not because they are more motivated, not because they have some magical gene for discipline, just because they can tolerate a little discomfort now without acting like their human rights have been violated. Long-term mindset lets you do boring, useful things over and over without needing emotional fireworks every day. You can train while looking basically the same for a while. You can save money before life feels different. You can build a business while nobody cares yet. You can meal prep without pretending it is a personality trait. And that matters because the good stuff in life usually compounds quietly first and gets obvious later. This mindset is amazing for health because it makes consistency possible. It is amazing for success because it keeps drive attached to direction rather than mood. You stop asking, does this feel good right now? And start asking, where does this lead if I keep doing it? Consumer mindset. This is the mindset of constantly taking things in and confusing that with progress. Watching videos, reading threads, buying courses, saving posts, listening to podcasts, screenshotting advice, nodding along like you are in church. Consumer mindset feels productive because you're always near useful information. But being near useful information is not the same as using it. This is why someone can know basically everything about fat loss and still stay out of shape, or know all the business advice and still never launch anything, or know exactly how to fix their sleep and still go to bed at ridiculous times every night. Consumer mindset keeps people in safe motion. They are busy enough to feel like they are doing something, but not exposed enough to actually change. It hurts health because action gets replaced by research. It hurts success because preparation becomes procrastination wearing glasses. And it kills drive because passive intake never creates the same momentum that real output does. Creator mindset. This one is way more powerful because it forces you into reality. Creator mindset asks, what can I make, test, build, improve, or ship? It turns you from a spectator into a participant. And yes, that means you look stupid more often. Good. That is the price of actually getting feedback from real life. In business, this mindset is everything. You stop theorizing and start launching. In health, it matters too. You stop admiring other people's routines and start building your own. You start figuring out what meals actually work for you, what training split you can actually recover from, what schedule you can realistically stick to, what structure keeps you sane. Creator mindset is amazing for drive because output creates momentum. Once things are moving, motivation has something to attach to. Confidence gets better too, because confidence is usually not created by thinking harder. It is created by doing things, surviving them, and realizing you are harder to break than you thought. Performance mindset. This is the mindset of proving you are enough, proving you are smart, proving you belong, proving you can win. It can create some very hardworking people, but a lot of them are quietly held together by duct tape and adrenaline. Because when your self-worth depends on outcomes, every bad result feels personal. In health, this creates all kinds of nonsense. People turn the scale into a moral report card. They overtrain because rest feels like weakness. They take every off day like an insult. In work, it is the same. A bad launch means they are a fraud. A dip in views means they are socially incompetent forever. Performance mindset can give people a lot of short-term drive, because fear is a hell of a drug. But it is unstable. It leads to burnout, perfectionism, anxiety, and a very fragile kind of confidence that only works while things are going well. Process mindset. This is the better version. Process mindset means you care more about the reps than the applause, more about the system than the emotional drama around results, more about what you can repeat than what looks impressive today. It is boring, which is exactly why it works. This mindset is amazing for health because it makes consistency normal. You stop turning every workout into a major emotional event. You stop treating every meal like it either saved your life or ruined your future. You care about the average, not the one-off. In success, it helps even more. Process-minded people can survive the invisible stage. They can keep showing up while nobody claps. They can have a bad week without converting it into a personality crisis. That stabilizes drive in a huge way. Now, motivation is not your boss. Your system is, and systems usually beat emotions over long enough timelines. Cynical mindset. This is the mindset that assumes everything is fake, everyone has an angle, and trying too hard makes you look stupid. Cynicism loves to dress itself up as intelligence. It sounds sharp, it sounds experienced, it sounds like the person has seen through the nonsense. And sometimes they have. But usually what is actually happening is they are using cynicism to protect themselves from disappointment. The problem is cynical people become spectators of their own life. They critique more than they commit. They mock more than they build. They keep one foot out of everything, so nothing can really hurt them. Great strategy if your only goal is avoiding embarrassment. Terrible strategy if you want health, success, intimacy, trust, progress, or meaning. Cynicism kills drive, because commitment always feels a little embarrassing to cynical people. Caring looks naive, hope looks weak, effort looks cringe, and once you start living like that, life gets very flat very fast. Hopeful mindset, not fake positivity, not delusion, not pretending everything is amazing while your life is on fire, just the ability to leave some room for the possibility that things can improve. That matters more than people think, because hopeless people quit way too early. They quit health goals too early, quit businesses too early, quit relationships too early, quit themselves too early. Hopeful mindset is powerful because it keeps drive alive after motivation dies. A lot of discipline is really just organized hope. It is behaving like the effort still matters, even on days where you cannot emotionally feel the payoff. Yet, that affects health massively, because health requires long periods where you are doing the right thing before you see obvious reward. It affects success the same way. Hopeful people keep going a little longer, and that little longer is usually where everything starts changing. Hope is not soft. Most of the time, it is the thing carrying the whole operation when everything else got tired and left. And honestly, this is why mindset matters so much more than people think. It is not just some fluffy self-help topic. It is the thing underneath your habits, the thing underneath your discipline, the thing underneath whether you stay the course or keep self-sabotaging every time life gets awkward. Depressants. This is the category that slows your central nervous system down. Alcohol, benzodiazepines like Xanax and Valium, barbiturates, Z-drugs like Ambien, and even some strong antihistamines all sit somewhere in this lane. The shared effect is that they reduce brain activity, which is why they make you feel calmer, less anxious, less inhibited, and then eventually slower, clumsier, and half unconscious if you keep pushing the dose. That is the broad category, but the specific drugs inside it do their damage in slightly different ways. Alcohol is the most normalized drug in this category, and one of the most damaging because people stop seeing it as a drug at all. In the short term, it wrecks coordination, judgment, reaction time, and memory. That is why people black out, fall over, crash cars, and wake up to messages they should never have sent. In the longer term, it is toxic to the liver, the gut lining, the heart, and the brain. It raises blood pressure, worsens sleep, increases cancer risk, and can eventually lead to fatty liver, hepatitis, and cirrhosis, where the liver becomes permanently scarred. Benzodiazepines like Xanax, Valium, Ativan, and Klonopin are a different kind of problem. They can be genuinely useful medically for panic, seizures, or acute anxiety, but they create tolerance and dependence fast in some people. Xanax hits quickly, which is part of why it is so easy to abuse. Valium lasts longer, which makes it feel smoother, but does not make it harmless. Withdrawal can be brutal, because the brain has adapted to being chemically slowed down. Suddenly taking that break away can trigger rebound anxiety, tremors, insomnia, and seizures. Then you have barbiturates, which are older depressants and generally nastier because the line between sedation and overdose is smaller. And Z-drugs like Ambien are often treated as sleep helpers rather than real drugs, but they can still cause dependence, memory problems, and bizarre sleep behaviors where people eat, text, or walk around half unconscious. So depressants feel relaxing right up until they start wrecking the systems they were giving temporary relief to. Stimulants, this is the opposite direction. Stimulants speed things up. Caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, methamphetamine, cocaine, methylphenidate, all of these increase alertness, heart rate, blood pressure, and dopamine or norepinephrine signaling in the brain. That is why they can make you feel focused, energized, motivated, euphoric, or invincible depending on the drug and the dose. But what they are really doing is pushing the nervous system harder than normal. Caffeine is the socially acceptable version. Coffee, energy drinks, pre-workout, cola. All of that. It blocks adenosine, so you feel less tired, which is useful. But the trap is that a lot of people stop using it as a boost and start using it just to feel baseline normal. Too much caffeine gives you palpitations, reflux, anxiety, shaky hands, and garbage sleep, which then makes you want more caffeine the next day. So even the mildest stimulant can create a pretty stupid loop. Nicotine is sneakier because it gives this weird mix of stimulation and relief. Cigarettes, vapes, pouches, all of them hook the brain through dopamine. Smoking adds cancer, COPD, and vascular damage. Vaping removes some combustion damage, but not the addiction or cardiovascular stress. Nicotine itself still raises heart rate, raises blood pressure, and tightens blood vessels. Amphetamines include things like Adderall and illicit speed. In medical settings, they can help ADHD by improving attention and impulse control. Outside that, they can suppress appetite, raise blood pressure, and create dependency. Cocaine is sharper and dirtier. It causes intense vasoconstriction, which means blood vessels clamp down hard, increasing the risk of heart attack and stroke, even in young people. Methamphetamine is the apocalypse version of stimulants. It combines extreme dopamine release with neurotoxicity and prolonged wakefulness, damaging teeth, skin, sleep, blood vessels, appetite regulation, and eventually brain function itself. The basic stimulant pattern is simple. They borrow energy from the future, and the more aggressively they borrow, the harder the body eventually tries to collect the debt. Opioids. This is the painkiller category. Morphine, oxycodone, hydrocodone, heroin, fentanyl, codeine, tramadol, all of these work primarily by binding to opioid receptors in the brain and spinal cord, reducing pain perception and often creating a powerful sense of warmth, relief, and emotional quiet. That relief is exactly why they become so addictive. They do not just reduce physical pain. They can reduce psychic pain too, which for someone going through something awful can feel almost magical. Morphine is the classic hospital opioid. It is strong, effective, and medically useful, but it still carries the same tolerance and respiratory depression risk as the rest. Oxycodone and hydrocodone became household names. For a reason, they were prescribed aggressively for pain, and huge numbers of people slid from legitimate use into dependence. Heroin is essentially the street version of that same opioid chase, just less controlled and more contaminated. Fentanyl is the monster in this category because it is incredibly potent in tiny amounts. A tiny dosing error can kill. That is why it has driven so many overdose deaths. Codeine is weaker, but weak does not mean harmless. It still causes dependence and still slows breathing at high enough doses. Tramadol is often presented like a softer, safer opioid, but it is weirdly messy because it also affects serotonin and norepinephrine, which means it can create seizure risk and ugly withdrawal patterns in some people. The body builds tolerance quickly, meaning the same dose stops producing the same effect, and people escalate. The biggest acute risk is respiratory depression. Opioids slow the drive to breathe, which is why overdose kills. Chronic use also wrecks the gut, causing severe constipation, disrupts hormone production, suppresses testosterone, dulls emotional range, and can make pain sensitivity worse over time through opioid-induced hyperalgesia. So the drug that started as pain relief can eventually make the body more pain-sensitive, more dependent, and far less functional. Hallucinogens. This is where the drug changes how you perceive reality rather than simply speeding you up or slowing you down. LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, mescaline, DMT all sit somewhere in this broad category, though they are not identical at all. Classic psychedelics mainly alter serotonin signaling and change visual perception, emotional processing, and the sense of self. LSD is long-lasting and mentally intense. A person can be altered for 10 to 12 hours, which means if the trip goes bad, it goes bad for a very long time. Psilocybin mushrooms are often treated as softer and more natural, which is a marketing vibe, not a safety feature. They can still trigger panic, paranoia, or a complete emotional tailspin in the wrong setting. Mescaline is usually less common, but still alters perception significantly, often with a lot of nausea mixed in. DMT is shorter and more explosive, throwing people into an intense altered state almost instantly. The physical toxicity of classic psychedelics is lower than many other drug classes, but the psychological volatility is the real risk. People predisposed to psychosis, bipolar disorder, or severe anxiety can get pushed into states that do not resolve cleanly. So even when the body is not being chemically poisoned in the same obvious way as with alcohol or meth, the brain can still be pushed into places it does not recover from neatly. Cannabis. Weed gets treated like it is either a miracle plant or a harmless joke depending on who you ask, and both takes are stupid. Cannabis affects memory, coordination, reaction time, motivation, and appetite through THC, acting on the endocannabinoid system. For some people, it reduces pain, helps with nausea, and genuinely improves quality of life. For other people, it becomes a daily dependency that blunts motivation, fragments sleep, and increases anxiety over time, instead of reducing it. Smoking flower carries the usual smoke in the lungs problem. Edibles bring a different risk because they hit later and last longer, which leads a lot of people to take more because they think nothing is happening yet, then get flattened 2 hours later. Concentrates and vape cartridges can deliver far higher THC doses than traditional weed, which seems to be part of why modern cannabis is more likely to trigger panic or paranoia in some users than older lower potency products were. Heavy use, especially with high THC products, is associated with impaired short-term memory, worse executive function, and a higher risk of psychosis in vulnerable individuals. Starting young seems to make that risk worse because the adolescent brain is still developing. Then there is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where long-term heavy users start getting repeated vomiting episodes relieved by hot showers. So cannabis is not the worst drug in the world, it is also not a harmless little herb, just because it comes from a plant. Dissociativists. This is the category that makes people feel detached from their body, their surroundings, or reality itself. Ketamine, PCP, nitrous oxide, and dextromethorphan, at high doses, all fall somewhere in here. Instead of simply making you more stimulated or more relaxed, these drugs disrupt how the brain integrates sensation, movement, and awareness. Ketamine is the cleanest known example. In medicine, it is useful as an anesthetic, and in some settings, for depression. Recreationally, it can cause people to lose coordination, dissociate hard, and enter what users call a K-hole, where they are mentally somewhere else entirely. Heavy use can badly damage the bladder and urinary tract. PCP is much uglier. It can cause agitation, violent behavior, paranoia, and full psychotic episodes. Nitrous oxide looks silly and harmless because it comes in balloons and gives a short floaty high, but repeated use can strip vitamin B12, itself down badly enough to cause numbness, weakness, and spinal cord damage. Dextromethorphan, the cough syrup ingredient, becomes dissociative in large doses and can cause confusion, high heart rate, overheating, and nasty interactions with antidepressants. So dissociatives are not just weird party drugs. They are chemicals that interfere directly with your relationship to reality, and that gets dangerous very quickly. And before you start thinking there must be some magical supplement stack that protects you from all this, there is not. What actually helps is getting your food and training sorted properly, which is exactly why I made both the Bland is Banned cookbook and the Summer Shred program. The cookbook has 102 recipes that are high in protein, lower in calories, easy to make, and actually taste like real food instead of sad diet nonsense. Stuff like high-protein burgers, crispy chicken wraps, loaded fries, pizzas, desserts, all that kind of food people assume they have to give up when they want to get lean. And the Summer Shred program is a 6-week personalized program made exactly for you, so you are not just copying some random generic PDF and hoping it works. It is built to give you a proper structure, and it also includes a free Bland is Banned cookbook with it as well. Both of them are half off for launch right now, so if you want them, be quick and get them while the sale is still on. First link in the description. Inhalants. This is one of the bleakest categories because it often starts with products that were never intended to be drugs at all. Glue, pain thinner, gasoline, aerosol sprays, nitrous oxide when used improperly. All of that. The reason they get used is because they are accessible and act fast. The reason they are so dangerous is because they are chemically filthy and the brain is directly exposed to them through the lungs. Glue and pain thinner are full of solvents that directly damage the nervous system. Gasoline fumes are toxic to basically everything. Aerosol sprays can trigger sudden cardiac death literally on first use through something called sudden sniffing death syndrome, where the heart becomes sensitized to adrenaline and slips into a fatal rhythm. Even when inhalants do not kill immediately, they damage white matter in the brain, impair coordination, memory, and judgment, and can cause irreversible neurological injury. So the fact that something comes from a garage shelf rather than a dealer does not make it safer. It usually means the opposite. Performance-enhancing drugs. This is where things get more socially complicated, because some of these drugs are used by people who are trying to look healthier, while quietly making very aggressive trade-offs underneath. Anabolic steroids, human growth hormone, insulin misuse, EPO, clenbuterol. All of these are used for performance, muscle, or fat loss. And yes, they work. That is why people take them. Anabolic steroids increase muscle protein synthesis and recovery, but they also raise blood pressure, worsen cholesterol profiles, enlarge the heart, suppress natural testosterone production, shrink the testicles, worsen acne, accelerate hair loss, and in some users, create major mood instability. Growth hormone can enlarge tissues in ways you do not want enlarged, including organs and facial structures. EPO thickens the blood, which increases clot risk. Clenbuterol is basically a stimulant with a bodybuilding fan base, so it can cause palpitations, tremors, and cardiac stress. Insulin misuse is unbelievably dangerous because a small error can cause severe hypoglycemia, seizures, coma, or death. These drugs are not fake, they are just expensive shortcuts with real physiological costs. Prescription misuse. This category matters because a drug does not become safe just because a doctor originally prescribed it to someone. ADHD meds used recreationally, painkillers taken above dose, sleep meds mixed with alcohol, anxiety medication used daily without supervision. All of that counts. Prescription drugs are powerful enough to create a medical effect, which means they are powerful enough to create medical harm when misused. Adderall and Ritalin get abused because people think they are study enhancers, but in people who do not medically need them, they can spike anxiety, raise heart rate, kill appetite, and create dependence. Sleep medications can produce memory gaps, next-day grogginess, and dependence when used too casually. Opioid painkillers are still opioids even with a pharmacy label. Benzos are still benzos even if the bottle came from a doctor. The problem here is familiarity. People treat prescription drugs with less suspicion because they came from a pharmacy instead of a dealer. The label looking professional does not change the pharmacology. Polydrug use. This is where people combine substances, intentionally or not, and the risk multiplies instead of adding normally. Alcohol plus opioids, benzos plus alcohol, weed plus heavy sedatives, stimulants to stay awake, depressants to come down, then more stimulants the next day, because the sleep was awful. The body does not experience these combinations as clever balancing. It experiences them as chaos. Alcohol and benzodiazepines both depress breathing, so together they raise overdose risk sharply. Cocaine plus alcohol creates cocaethylene in the liver, which is even more toxic to the heart than cocaine alone. Stimulants can hide how drunk or sedated a person really is, which tricks them into taking more of everything. A huge percentage of fatal overdoses involve more than one drug. The most dangerous drug category is often not a single drug at all. It is people treating their nervous system like a chemistry set and assuming the body will somehow sort it out. Germ theory. This is probably the single most important discovery in all of human health history, and most people could not explain it properly if you put a microphone in their face. Before germ theory, nobody really knew what caused disease. The dominant idea for centuries was that sickness came from bad air, rotting matter producing some kind of invisible miasma that made people ill. And this theory was not completely stupid. Sick people did tend to cluster near places that smelled awful. It was just wrong about the reason why. The actual reason was that dirty environments bred bacteria and parasites, not magical poisonous air. And the man who figured this out properly was Louis Pasteur in the 1860s. He proved that microorganisms, actual tiny living things you cannot see with the naked eye, cause fermentation, decay, and disease. Robert Koch built on this shortly after and connected specific bacteria to specific diseases: tuberculosis, cholera, anthrax. Suddenly, disease had an actual cause you could identify, track, and eventually fight. That shift from miasma theory to germ theory basically invented modern medicine. Everything after it, every antibiotic, every vaccine, every sterilization protocol, every public health system was built on top of that foundation. Clean water and sanitation. This one does not sound exciting until you find out that cholera alone killed tens of millions of people across multiple global pandemics. In the 1800s, and cholera spreads through contaminated water, so does typhoid, and dysentery, and a dozen other things that regularly wiped out entire city districts. The turning point came from an English doctor named John Snow, who in 1854 mapped a cholera outbreak in London street by street and traced it back to one specific water pump. He convinced authorities to remove the handle, the outbreak slowed, and he essentially invented the field of epidemiology in the process. But beyond Snow's famous case, the bigger change was systemic. Cities started building proper sewage systems and water treatment infrastructure. Fecal contamination stopped leaking into drinking water. And deaths from waterborne diseases collapsed. If you live somewhere with clean tap water today, that infrastructure is probably the single biggest silent reason you are still alive. Vaccines. Smallpox killed somewhere between 300 and 500 million people in the 20th century alone. Let that number sit for a second. And that is just one disease in just one century. Before that, it had been a death sentence or a disfigurement sentence for thousands of years. And it is now completely eradicated from the earth. Not managed, not treated, gone. The reason is vaccination. Edward Jenner developed the first vaccine in 1796, noticing that milkmaids who caught cowpox seemed protected from smallpox. He tested this idea, found it worked, and introduced the concept that exposing your immune system to a weakened or similar version of a pathogen could train it to fight the real thing. It sounds obvious now because we grew up with vaccines being completely normal, but at the time, it was revolutionary. The immune system could be trained. Disease could be prevented before it ever started. And the diseases that vaccination eventually either eliminated or dramatically reduced, smallpox, polio, measles, diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, represent probably hundreds of millions of lives saved. And if you want to eat in a way that actually supports your immune system instead of working against it, my cookbook has 102 healthy recipes that are easy to make and do not taste like something a doctor prescribed. It is half price right now for just $29.99. Also, summer's coming up fast, and I just dropped my brand new Summer Shred. It's a 6-week fat loss system with a personalized meal plan. Real meals you'll actually want to eat, and none of the boring diet food crap. If you want to lean down for summer, check out my week Summer Shred program. It's 50% off right now for launch, so make sure you take advantage of the sale and go get it. First link in the description below. Antibiotics. Before antibiotics, a scratch could kill you. Not a stab wound, not a serious injury. A scratch, an infected tooth, a cut that got dirty, a case of pneumonia, a urinary tract infection. Things that are now minor inconveniences were genuine death threats for most of human history. Because once bacteria got into your body and started multiplying, there was basically nothing medicine could do to stop them. You either survived on your immune system alone, or you did not. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928 by accident when he came back from holiday and found mold growing in a petri dish that was killing the bacteria around it. He almost threw it out. He did not. And that moment of not throwing it out eventually led to the development of the first true antibiotic, which by World War II was already saving thousands of soldiers from infections that would have killed them in any previous war. Antibiotics did not just treat infections. They made surgery survivable, cancer treatment possible, organ transplants feasible. Almost every major medical advance that followed depended on our ability to control bacterial infection. Hand washing. I know that sounds embarrassingly simple for a list about discoveries that doubled human lifespan, but bear with me because the resistance to this idea was genuinely insane. A Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis figured out in 1847 that doctors were killing their own patients by going from performing autopsies directly to delivering babies without washing their hands in between. He noticed that the maternity ward staffed by doctors had a death rate 5 times higher than the one staffed by midwives, who did not do autopsies. He started requiring doctors to wash with chlorinated lime solution, and the death rate dropped dramatically. You would think that would make him a hero. It did not. The medical establishment rejected him completely. He was eventually committed to an asylum and died there, ironically of an infection. He was later vindicated when Pasteur's germ theory explained exactly why hand washing worked, and what Semmelweis demonstrated became the basis for surgical sterilization, aseptic technique, and hospital hygiene standards that today prevent millions of deaths every year. Blood types and transfusions. People had been trying to transfuse blood between patients for centuries, with mostly catastrophic results. Sometimes it worked, more often the patient just died faster. The reason no one understood was that blood types existed. Karl Landsteiner discovered the IBO blood group system in 1901, which explained why some transfusions were compatible and others caused the immune system to attack the donated blood as a foreign invader. Once blood typing became standard practice, transfusions became safe and reliable. And once transfusions became safe, surgery became survivable at a completely different level. You could lose a dangerous amount of blood in an operation and have it replaced. Trauma medicine changed entirely. Childbirth became dramatically safer. Blood banking became possible. And the ability to reliably move blood from one human body to another became a cornerstone of almost every type of life-saving medicine we now take for granted. The discovery of insulin. Before 1921, a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes was basically a death sentence, usually within months. There was no treatment. Some doctors tried near-starvation diets to slow the progression, but that just extended the suffering slightly, while making the patient miserable. Children were dying. Young adults were dying. The pancreas was not producing insulin. The body could not process blood sugar properly, and without some way to supply that missing hormone from outside, the body would eventually just shut down. Frederick Banting and Charles Best extracted insulin from dog pancreases and used it to treat a diabetic dog in 1921. The dog had been dying, it recovered. They then treated a 14-year-old boy named Leonard Thompson, who was near death, and he survived. He went on to live another 13 years before dying of pneumonia. The discovery of insulin did not just save diabetics. It demonstrated that hormone replacement therapy was possible. It was one of the first times in medical history that a fatal metabolic condition could be managed with an external substance. And it opened the door to an entire category of treatment that now covers everything from thyroid disease to infertility. Pasteurization and food safety. Spoiled food and contaminated food has been killing people since humans started eating. And even beyond obvious food poisoning, the practice of drinking raw milk alone was a significant vector for tuberculosis, typhoid, scarlet fever, and brucellosis. Louis Pasteur, who already appeared earlier in this list, developed pasteurization in the 1860s, a process of heating liquids briefly to kill harmful microorganisms without destroying the product. The adoption of pasteurization across milk, juice, and other liquids, combined with improving refrigeration technology and food storage standards, did not just prevent food poisoning, it collapsed infant mortality rates significantly because young children were especially vulnerable to the pathogens in unpasteurized dairy. In communities where pasteurized milk became standard, infant deaths dropped dramatically. Whether pasteurized milk is actually healthier than raw milk, or whether something is lost in the process, that is a debate that is genuinely still going on. Drop your take in the comments. Understanding nutrition and deficiency diseases. For most of human history, nobody understood why populations eating certain diets would develop blindness, scurvy, rickets, or pellagra. The connection between food and these conditions was not obvious when you did not know vitamins existed. People thought scurvy was caused by bad air on ships. They thought rickets was just bad genetics. They thought pellagra was infectious. The discovery that specific nutrients prevented specific diseases was not a single moment. It happened gradually through the late 1800s and early 1900s, as researchers identified vitamin C, vitamin D, B vitamins, iron, and others. And when public health systems started actually applying this knowledge, fortifying flour with B vitamins, adding iodine to salt, vitamin D to milk, the diseases associated with those deficiencies did not slowly decline. They almost vanished. Rickets largely disappeared. Goiter from iodine deficiency dropped dramatically. Neural tube defects in newborns fell after folic acid fortification. Nutrition science went from a curiosity to one of the most powerful public health tools ever deployed. Anesthesia and modern surgery. Surgery before anesthesia was not medicine in any sense you would recognize today. It was controlled butchery performed, while the patient was either screaming or held down. Surgeons competed on speed because every extra minute of surgery was another minute of agony the patient had to survive. Amputations were considered the reliable option because longer procedures had too high a death rate from shock and pain. The idea of opening a chest or abdomen and doing anything delicate inside was not on the table. That changed in the 1840s with ether and then chloroform. Patients could now be rendered unconscious and kept that way long enough for surgeons to actually do their job properly. Speed was no longer the only priority. Precision became possible. And from there, surgery expanded into territory that would have been completely unimaginable a generation earlier. Appendectomies, heart surgery, brain surgery, joint replacements, none of it happens without the ability to put someone fully under and keep them there safely.